My name's Ryan. I'm 23, and last month I walked across the stage in my cap and gown with a smile plastered on my face, pretending like my heart wasn't breaking. Graduation was supposed to be one of those rare milestones where a family puts everything aside, comes together, and just celebrates. You only get that moment once. But for me, it was a reminder of where I stood in the family hierarchy, always second place, always the responsible one who kept things running quietly in the background while my younger brother, Daniel, got the spotlight for doing just about anything. To understand why that moment cut so deep, you need to know the family dynamic. Growing up, Daniel was the golden child. He was the kid who got the loudest cheers at his soccer games, even if he spent most of the match sitting on the bench. If he brought home a C on his report card, Mom would say, "At least he tried. That's what matters." Meanwhile, when I came home with straight A's, Dad would glance at my paper, nod, and then ask me if I'd mowed the lawn yet. It was this constant pattern where my achievements were brushed aside, and Daniel's smallest efforts were celebrated like he'd cured a disease. I can't even count how many family dinners ended with me clearing plates in the kitchen while my brother basked in compliments at the table. But I held it together. I worked. I studied. I didn't complain because a part of me thought, maybe one day they'll see the difference. Maybe when I hit a real milestone, like graduating from college, first in the family, by the way, they'd finally look at me with pride. That was naive, I know, but hope has a way of hanging around even when it shouldn't. So when graduation was getting close, I called home with excitement. I told them the date, explained the ceremony, and asked if they'd like to come. My mom made a non-committal noise, the kind she uses when she's pretending to be interested. My dad was the one who cut in with his usual bluntness. "Ryan, we're busy celebrating your brother," he said. Just like that. Like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I remember gripping the phone tighter, my mouth going dry. "Celebrating what?" I asked. "He bought a motorcycle," Dad said, almost proudly. Like a motorcycle compared to a college degree made sense. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I felt like I'd just been told the quiet truth I'd suspected all along. Nothing I did was ever going to be enough. I went to my graduation alone. My roommate, Eric, showed up to clap for me, which meant more than I think he realized. He even snapped a picture of me holding my diploma. That's the only photo I have from that day. Later that evening, as I sat down to a quiet dinner I had planned for my family, I scrolled through my phone. My aunt had posted a photo on Facebook, Daniel grinning, his arms slung around Dad, a beer in hand. The caption read, "Family toast for the real winner." My stomach twisted. The real winner. That stung more than anything. My degree didn't matter. For years of grinding through late nights, skipping parties, eating noodles to save money, it was invisible compared to the shiny chrome of a new motorcycle. I paid the bill for my untouched graduation dinner anyway. $2,110. That wasn't just for the meal. It was the culmination of all the little ways I had been financially responsible for my family. You see, what they never acknowledged out loud was that I'd been quietly paying down a business loan for years. My dad's business, his pride and joy, had taken out money that, honestly, they couldn't keep up with. I'd stepped in, covering monthly payments without complaint because, well, that's what family does, Mom would say. I told myself I was doing it for stability, for peace, for the hope that one day, maybe they'd see I was carrying the weight. But sitting there in that restaurant, watching strangers toast each other while I sat alone on my big day, something in me shifted. The bitterness I'd swallowed for years turned into a cold, sharp realization. I'd been holding up the foundation of a house where I wasn't even welcome inside. And that night, I decided I wasn't going to carry it anymore. When I got home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the loan account. My name was the one linked to the payments. My money had been propping it up. For years of sacrifice, while my brother coasted and my parents applauded. I hit the button to shut it off. Just like that, the responsibility slid off my shoulders. Before I left the house the next morning, I printed out the confirmation page, folded it neatly, and placed it on the desk in my parents' office. On top, I left a note. Let him handle it. My hand didn't even shake when I wrote it. For once, I felt calm. By sunrise, my phone lit up with 76 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Daniel. Back to back, buzzing like they were all waking up from a dream and realizing what reality felt like without me cushioning the blows. And that's where things started to unravel. When the calls started, I ignored them. At first, it was easy. Just silence my phone, tuck it under the pillow, and stare at the ceiling, breathing in that strange mix of guilt and relief. But by mid-morning, when I finally checked, I saw the number, 76 missed calls. 76. From the people who couldn't even drive 20 minutes to sit at my graduation dinner. That irony wasn't lost on me. The voicemails were a whole other story. Mom's voice trembled with a practiced kind of panic, the kind she always used when she wanted something. Ryan, honey, you can't just do this. This is serious. Your father's business depends on you keeping those payments going. Call us back. The second one was sharper. Ryan, stop acting childish. This is not the time for drama. We'll talk later. By the fifth, she had dropped the honey altogether. It was just, Ryan, pick up. Right now. Dad's messages were short and cutting. What do you think you're doing? Don't mess around with things you don't understand. And the one that played over and over in my head. You're sabotaging your own family. But Daniel's? His was the one that twisted the knife. He laughed, actually laughed, into the phone. Dude, you're overreacting. It's just money. You'll keep paying, don't worry. You've always been the responsible one. As if my role in life was to carry everyone else's weight while he sped around on his shiny new bike, grinning for family photos. That night, I went to bed with my phone on silent, but I couldn't sleep. Every voicemail replayed in my mind. Not just the words, but the tone, the entitlement, the expectation that I would fold, because that's what I'd always done. For years, I'd said yes. I'd swallowed my pride. I'd been invisible. But now that I'd finally said no, suddenly I was the selfish one, the dramatic one, the problem. The next morning, I found out they weren't going to stop at phone calls. My aunt, yes, the same one who posted family toast for the real winner, tagged me in a Facebook post. It was a photo of Daniel sitting on his motorcycle in the driveway, smiling like a kid on Christmas morning. The caption, so proud of this young man. Responsible, hardworking, always taking care of family. He deserves the world. Responsible, hardworking, always taking care of family. My chest actually hurt when I read that. Because those were the words that should have been mine. I was the one who'd worked 2 jobs to cover the loan payments. I was the one who'd skipped vacations, skipped nights out, skipped breathing room, just so they could keep their house from foreclosure. And yet here she was, handing my story to Daniel like it was his trophy. The comments piled on. He's such a good son. What a man, already stepping up for the family. Your parents must be so proud. I shut my laptop so hard it rattled the table. By then, the calls had escalated into texts. My mom's messages filled the screen. You don't understand the kind of trouble you're causing. This is going to ruin us if you don't fix it. Daniel can't help. You know that. He's just starting out. You're the one with stability. That word again, stability. It was never about me. It was never about my dreams, or my graduation, or even the hours I spent dragging myself through college. I was just the safety net, the stable one, the background character in their story, expected to keep smiling while everyone else took the credit. I tried to distract myself, but the silence in my apartment felt louder than their calls. I kept remembering little things. Christmas mornings when Daniel got the newest gadgets while I unwrapped socks. Birthdays where my cake came from the clearance rack, but has had custom designs. The time he got caught drinking at a party and Dad shrugged it off as boys being boys, while I once came home 5 minutes past curfew and got grounded for a month. It was like all those years of small cuts suddenly bled out at once. 3 days passed before I finally picked up one of their calls. It was Mom. Her voice was sweet at first, sticky sweet, the way it gets when she's about to corner you. Ryan, honey, we just need to talk. We know you're upset about graduation. We're sorry we couldn't be there. But you understand, it was a big day for your brother too. I almost laughed. A big day for him? Buying a motorcycle? My chest tightened, but I didn't interrupt. She went on. This isn't the time to make rash decisions. The business loan isn't just about your father, it's about all of us. If you don't make those payments, we could lose everything. Is that what you want? For your family to be homeless? There it was, the manipulation. She didn't say, thank you for keeping us afloat for 4 years. She didn't say, we're proud of you for graduating. She didn't even acknowledge the effort. No, it was straight to guilt. Straight to the big, dramatic, we'll be homeless line. And I realized, in that moment, that nothing I could say would ever be enough. If I agreed, I'd be trapped again. If I refused, I'd be the villain. There was no winning, at least not on their terms. That night, I sat down at my desk, staring at the stack of old bank statements I'd kept tucked away in a drawer. Years of proof that I had been the one quietly holding everything together while they cheered for Daniel. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back to being their safety net. Not again. And that decision, that's when the real tension started to unfold. I wish I could say that after days of silence, things cooled down, that maybe my parents took a step back and realized how unfair they'd been. But that's not how this family operates. When they can't guilt me into submission, they escalate. They've done it my whole life. Twist the story, pile on the pressure, make me out to be the unreasonable one until I crack. It was the fourth day after I'd stopped the loan payments when the betrayal landed like a punch in the gut. I was at work, sitting through a training session, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Eric, my roommate. Bro, are you seeing this? Check Facebook. Now. I slipped my phone under the table and opened the app. My stomach dropped instantly. There it was, a long post on my mother's profile, written in that dramatic, self-pitying tone she reserves for when she wants to play the victim. My heart is breaking tonight, it began. After all the sacrifices we've made for our oldest son, he's decided to turn his back on his family. We supported him through school, paid his bills, gave him everything, and now, when we need him most, he's abandoned us. Please pray for us during this difficult time. I couldn't breathe. My pulse pounded in my ears as I scrolled through the comments. Neighbors, relatives, church friends, people I'd known my whole life, were chiming in with sympathy. I can't believe Ryan would do this to you. How selfish. Don't worry, God will provide. And the worst one, at least you have Daniel. He's such a good son. Daniel had commented too, of course. Don't worry, Mom. I'll always be here for you guys. You can count on me. Count on him. For what? He hadn't paid a dime toward that loan. He hadn't lifted a finger to keep their business above water. But there he was, soaking up praise for his empty words while I was being crucified online. By lunchtime, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years messaged me things like, "Why are you doing this to your parents?" One even wrote, "You know Daniel can't handle this stuff. Why would you dump it on him?" Dump it on him? It had been dumped on me for 4 years. When I got home that evening, I found Eric sitting on the couch with his arms crossed. "You okay, man?" he asked gently. He had already printed a screenshot of the post and set it on the coffee table like evidence. "They're throwing you under the bus hard." I just nodded, too angry to speak. It wasn't just that they lied. It was that they rewrote the whole narrative. Suddenly, I was the ungrateful son they'd sacrificed everything for. They erased the fact that I'd drained my savings every month to keep their business afloat. They erased my graduation, my achievements, my sacrifices. And they did it publicly for everyone to see. Later that night, the phone call started again, only this time I answered. It was Dad. His voice was cold, almost rehearsed. "So this is how it's going to be? You think you can just walk away after everything we've done for you?" I snapped. "What you've done for me? I've been paying your business loan for 4 years. With my own money. You never even said thank you. And then you have the nerve to go online and tell everyone you paid for my life." He didn't even pause. "Watch your tone, Ryan. You wouldn't have gotten through school without us. You're alive because of us. Don't forget that. That line. You're alive because of us." It was the exact kind of manipulative card they always played, the one that made me feel like I owed them everything forever. But this time, something inside me hardened. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. I felt betrayal so sharp it burned. As if things weren't bad enough. The next morning, my boss called me into her office. She looked uncomfortable, sliding her phone across the desk. "Ryan," she said softly, "I don't know what's going on with your family, but your mom called here this morning. She said you've been acting unstable, that you're making reckless decisions, and she wanted me to keep an eye on you." I froze. My own mother had called my workplace to smear me, to paint me as unreliable, to make sure if I didn't cave at home, I'd feel the pressure at work too. I muttered an apology to my boss, promising everything was fine, but my hands shook the entire day. That wasn't just manipulation. That was sabotage. That was my own mother deliberately trying to ruin the one thing I had left that was mine. My job, my independence, my escape. I went home that night and sat in the dark, staring at the wall. It hit me with brutal clarity. There was no going back after this. They hadn't just ignored my graduation. They hadn't just taken me for granted. They had actively turned me into the villain, and now they were trying to crush me publicly, privately, professionally. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt dangerous. And that's when the idea of revenge started to form. The days after my mother's phone call to my job were some of the darkest I can remember. I kept replaying it in my head. Her voice, the way she must have leaned into the phone with that practiced mix of concern and superiority, telling my boss I was unstable. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to weaken me, to make sure I had no place to stand that wasn't under her thumb. The fallout came fast. My boss, though kind enough not to fully buy into it, still treated me differently for the rest of the week. Every time I walked into her office, I could see it in her eyes. Doubt, like she was quietly evaluating whether I was really as reckless as my mother claimed. My coworkers started whispering too, not because they knew the details, but because the tension hung around me like a storm cloud. It didn't matter what the truth was. The seed had been planted. My own mother planted it. At home, the silence was unbearable. My phone lit up nonstop, calls, texts, voicemails, family group chats exploding with messages I refused to open. Even my grandmother, who had always been the one person to treat me fairly, sent a short message. "Call your mother. She's worried sick." I wanted to scream. She wasn't worried sick. She was cornered. But how do you explain that to someone who's only ever heard her side? By the end of that week, I stopped going out. Eric would knock on my door to check on me, but I usually just muttered something through the wood. Food didn't taste right. Music sounded like noise. The one thing I'd worked so hard for, my degree, my future, suddenly felt small compared to the weight of the betrayal. One night, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the bank statements I'd pulled earlier. Line after line of payments I had made, month after month, for 4 years. Rent money, food money, savings money, all drained into a loan that wasn't mine. I traced the numbers with my finger until my eyes blurred. That was my 20s so far. My youth. My chance to enjoy being young. Wasted because I thought I was keeping a family together. And where had it gotten me? Alone, humiliated, and branded as selfish. That's when the bitterness began to turn into something else. A plan. Not a full one yet. Not with steps and details, but the beginnings of resolve. If they could lie about me publicly, maybe it was time to let the truth speak for itself. If they could erase my sacrifices, maybe I could make them impossible to ignore. But before I could get to that point, I had to sit in the pit a while longer. 2 weeks passed, and the messages didn't stop. They got nastier. Mom wrote, "You've always been dramatic, Ryan. We thought college would mature you, but clearly it hasn't." Dad sent, "When this all comes crashing down, don't come crawling back." Daniel sent, "Bro, just turn the payments back on. You know you'll end up doing it anyway." That last one burned the most. He said it like my role as the family's financial safety net wasn't even up for debate. Like it was inevitable. Meanwhile, their Facebook posts continued. Another photo of Daniel, this time helping Dad in the garage. Caption, "A real man steps up when times are tough. So proud of our son." The comments gushed again, as if he'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. I nearly threw my phone across the room. I stopped checking Facebook after that. It wasn't worth watching my own story get rewritten in real time. But even as I turned away from their noise, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this be my life. Me in the shadows, them in the spotlight, my sacrifices erased and replaced by their fiction. Late one night, I sat with Eric at the kitchen table. He was eating cereal out of the box and watching me quietly. "So what now?" he finally asked. I shrugged. "I don't know." "Yeah, you do," he said. "You're just not saying it yet." He was right. Deep down, I knew exactly what had to happen, but saying it out loud made it real. So instead, I just looked at him and whispered, "I can't keep being their safety net. Not anymore. If they want to keep lying, then they can live with the truth when it finally catches up." Eric leaned back, nodded slowly, and said nothing more. Sometimes silence says enough. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Not peacefully, not dreamlessly, but with a strange calm that comes when you've finally accepted that the old chapter is closed, even if the new one hasn't begun. And that calm, that tiny seed of resolve, was the beginning of everything that came next. It's strange how once you accept that a door is closed, you start noticing other ones waiting to be opened. The first few weeks after I shut down the loan payments were suffocating, but But once I let myself stop carrying the guilt, something shifted. For the first time in years, I had extra money in my account at the end of the month. It wasn't much, but seeing those numbers not immediately drained by someone else's debt, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. The timing couldn't have been better. My degree in finance wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It started opening real opportunities. A former professor connected me with a mid-sized firm downtown, and after a couple of interviews, I landed an entry-level analyst position. The pay wasn't astronomical, but it was mine. No strings, no family obligations tied to it. The first paycheck I deposited felt like the most valuable money I'd ever earned, even though it was less than what I'd made scraping together side jobs during school. Because this time, I didn't owe it to anyone. Meanwhile, Eric became my biggest supporter. He'd clap me on the shoulder when I came home late, reminding me, one step at a time, man. Sometimes he'd even shove a bowl of ramen into my hands and say, eat now, scheme later. It sounds small, but after years of carrying everything alone, those little gestures felt enormous. I started to rebuild, slowly. I paid down my own student debt, something I'd barely touched because my parents' loan had always come first. I bought myself a secondhand laptop, something faster than the ancient one I'd been using since high school. I even went out with coworkers once or twice, sitting in bars I used to avoid because I couldn't justify spending $10 on a drink. Every step forward made me stronger, but it also highlighted just how much I had given up before. I thought about all the times I skipped out on things to save money, only to funnel it into my parents' business debt. I thought about the years of working double shifts at the campus library while my classmates traveled or interned. And now, I realized it wasn't that I couldn't afford those experiences, I just wasn't allowed to, because I was too busy holding up a family that would never admit it. The best part? Word started to spread through the extended family about my job. My cousin Jenna, one of the few relatives who actually believed me, messaged me on Instagram. Congrats on the new role. That's amazing. Slowly, people outside my immediate family started to see me as something other than the villain my parents painted online. Of course, Mom and Dad didn't see it that way. When they eventually found out about my new job, Mom left a voicemail dripping with sarcasm. Oh, so now you can help again. Good, we'll talk soon about the loan. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. Even after everything, the posts, the lies, the sabotage, they still believed I'd come crawling back the moment I had steady income. I didn't return the call. Instead, I started preparing. One evening, I dug out the box under my bed where I'd been keeping every scrap of proof, bank statements, email confirmations, screenshots of payments. For years' worth of evidence that I, not Daniel, not my parents, had been the one shouldering the business loan. Looking at the neat stack of documents, I realized I was holding power for the first time. They had their stories, their lies, their public image. But I had the receipts. Literal receipts. The more I built my own life, the more I saw how fragile theirs actually was. Their business was crumbling without my support. Rumors started circulating that Dad was missing payments. One of their suppliers even called me directly, assuming I was still involved, asking about late invoices. I told him, politely but firmly, that I was no longer connected to the business. He sighed and muttered, "Figures. You were the only one who ever answered emails on time." That comment stuck with me. People were starting to notice. The cracks were widening. At the same time, I began to grow socially in ways I hadn't before. At work, I impressed one of the senior partners by staying late to fix a messy spreadsheet before a client presentation. He told me I had a good head for strategy. For someone like me, who had spent years being told I was dramatic, immature, or selfish, it was like fuel. Someone finally saw me for what I was capable of. I didn't broadcast any of this to my family. I kept quiet, let them believe I was still floundering without them. But inside, I was building momentum. Every step forward, every small win, every dollar saved, it was all stacking up into something I knew would matter later. And as I sat there one night, flipping through my stack of bank statements, a thought crystallized in my mind. They had spent years erasing me. But what happens when the erased one starts writing the story himself? I smiled to myself, tucked the papers back into the box, and thought, they won't see this coming. The first real crack in their armor came by accident. I was at work one Friday evening, wrapping up a report, when I overheard two partners talking in the hallway. One mentioned my father's company by name. My ears pricked instantly. Apparently, my dad's business had approached the firm months earlier, seeking financial advice. They'd been denied because their books were a mess. Expenses hidden, debts shuffled, payments delayed. I froze at my desk. I'd always suspected things were bad, but hearing professionals describe the company as a sinking ship waiting for a spark made my chest tighten. Later that night, I went home and opened the old loan documents again. I'd always focused on the payments, the money flowing out of my account. But this time, I paid attention to the fine print. And that's when I noticed something I'd never let myself think too hard about before. Legally, I was listed as a guarantor, not just a kind-hearted son covering bills. My signature tied me to their mess. My parents hadn't just leaned on me. They'd locked me into responsibility without ever asking if I truly understood the risk. I had been 19 when I signed, home for the weekend, Dad thrusting papers in front of me with a casual, "Just sign here so we can keep things running." Back then, I'd been too eager to prove I was trustworthy, too desperate for their approval. I signed without reading every clause, and that mistake had cost me years. But now I was older, wiser, and sitting on years of proof that I hadn't just been helping out. I'd been exploited. I started quietly talking to contacts at work, not directly about my family, but in general about loan guarantors, small business liability, and what happens when payments stop. One of the senior associates, a woman named Lisa, leaned back in her chair one afternoon and said something that clicked. When people misuse guarantors, it almost always comes back to bite them. Courts don't like manipulation, especially if there's documentation. Documentation. That word echoed in my head as I pictured the neat stack of bank statements under my bed. At the same time, I noticed a shift in how my family interacted online. Their Facebook posts had grown less triumphant. Instead of bragging about Daniel's motorcycle or the real winner, they were suddenly quieter, sharing vague quotes about hard times and faith being tested. I even saw a post from my aunt asking for donations to help keep the family business afloat. Donations. The same people who once called me selfish were now publicly begging strangers for help. And then came the message that sealed my decision. Daniel texted me one night, "Yo, Dad says the bank's on our case. Just turn the payments back on for a while until things settle, okay? Be a team player." A team player. Like I was just a cog in their machine, expected to keep spinning until it broke me completely. I stared at the message for a long time before replying with a single sentence. "I'm not on your team anymore." No response came back, but I knew that silence meant they were panicking. Meanwhile, at work, I was excelling. I'd been assigned to a new project analyzing distressed businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally being trained to spot the patterns I'd lived through with my parents. The deeper I got into the project, the clearer the picture became. My father's company wasn't just struggling. It was collapsing. And without me, they were weeks away from default. That knowledge gave me a strange sense of power. For years, I had been the invisible backbone, the one propping them up without recognition. Now, I had stepped away, and they were wobbling on their own. One night, Eric found me at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, highlighter marks everywhere. "You're plotting," he said flatly. "Preparing," I corrected. He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" I tapped the stack of bank statements and said, "For the day they try to drag me back down with them. Because they will. And when they do, I'm not going to be the quiet son who just takes it anymore. I'll have everything I need." Eric grinned. "Good. About time." It wasn't just preparation anymore. It was strategy. Every email, every statement, every signed document went into a folder organized by date. I backed it all up on a drive. I even started writing a timeline of events, from the moment Dad first shoved those papers in front of me to the night I shut off the loan payments. Piece by piece, I was building not just a defense, but leverage. And the best part? They had no idea. To them, I was still the weak link, the son sulking in silence, too immature to face reality. They thought they had the upper hand. But for the first time in my life, I knew something they didn't. The higher they climbed on their lies, the harder they'd fall when the truth finally hit. And I would be the one to strike the match. The day my revenge started wasn't loud. There was no dramatic showdown, no screaming match at a family dinner. It began with a quiet letter. I had spent weeks assembling everything: bank statements, signed loan documents, screenshots of text messages, copies of their Facebook posts bragging about Daniel while I was silently footing the bills. I organized it all into a neat binder, each section tabbed, each page dated. If you flipped through it, the story was undeniable. A 19-year-old tricked into signing papers, a young man sacrificing years of his life to cover a debt that wasn't his, and a family who twisted that sacrifice into lies. Then I walked into the bank. The loan officer recognized my father's name instantly. His expression tightened when I handed him the binder. "I think you should see this," I said calmly. He skimmed through the first few pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. After a few minutes, he leaned back in his chair. "You've been the one making the payments?" "For 4 years," I replied. "Not my father. Not my brother. Just me." He closed the binder, exhaled slowly, and said, "Mr. Carter, this changes things." That was the moment the tide turned. By documenting everything, I made it clear that I wasn't just some irresponsible guarantor who walked away. I was the victim of manipulation. And the bank, suddenly realizing they'd been misled, had no choice but to adjust how they handled the account. Within a week, my parents got the first letter from the bank demanding payment in full. Without my contributions, they were already behind, and now the bank had stripped away their usual excuses. My father called me that night, his voice shaking with anger. "What did you do?" he barked. "I told the truth," I said simply. "You've ruined us. Do you understand that?" "No, Dad. You ruined yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. But I wasn't done. The next step was more public, though still controlled. I reached out to my grandmother, the one relative I trusted. I asked her if she'd like to see something important. She came to my apartment, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and flipped through the binder page by page. Her hands trembled as she read. "They told everyone you abandoned them," she whispered, her eyes wide. I nodded. "I know." By the time she left, she promised me she'd never believe their side again. And word travels fast in families, especially when the matriarch shifts her loyalty. Cousins who had messaged me with accusations before started sending apologies. One even wrote, "I had no idea." They made it sound so different. Meanwhile, my parents doubled down online. They posted vague statuses about betrayal and ungrateful children. But the comments weren't what they expected this time. People asked questions. People pushed back. "Didn't Ryan pay your loan for years?" One neighbor commented. I remember him working 2 jobs. For the first time, their narrative was cracking in public. "And Daniel?" He tried to call me too, his usual cocky tone faltering. "Bro, you're making things worse. Just help out for a little while longer. You know I can't deal with this stuff." I almost laughed. "That's the point, Daniel. You never could, and now you'll have to." Then I hung up. But the most satisfying moment came a few weeks later. My father showed up at my work. He tried to act calm, dressed in a suit that didn't quite hide the sweat on his brow. He pulled me aside into the lobby, lowered his voice, and said, "You think you've won? You've embarrassed us. You've destroyed your own family." I looked him in the eye and, for the first time in my life, didn't flinch. "No, Dad." I freed myself from it. He had no comeback. He just stood there, breathing hard, before finally walking out into the cold evening air. And as I watched him go, I realized the revenge wasn't about humiliating them. It was about reclaiming my life. They had built their comfort on my silence, and I had taken that silence away. That was the strike they never saw coming. Still, I knew there would be fallout. Their business was unraveling, their reputation was slipping, and their grip on the family narrative was broken. And part of me couldn't help but wonder, how far would they go, now that the mask was cracking? The fallout came faster than even I expected. Within a month, the bank officially seized control of my parents' business. The loan I had been propping up for years was now in default, and without me shielding them, there was nowhere left to hide. The small storefront that had once been my father's pride sat shuttered, a "For Lease" sign slapped across the window. Neighbors whispered, customers drifted away, and the business that had consumed our family's entire identity was gone. At first, my parents tried to spin it. On Facebook, they wrote posts about how the economy is cruel and how not everyone understands the sacrifices we've made. But the comments section was no longer a chorus of sympathy. People had seen the cracks, heard the whispers, and more than a few had quietly heard my side of the story from my grandmother. The tone had shifted. Instead of "We're praying for you," there were questions. "Didn't Ryan pay your loan for years? Why didn't Daniel step up?" The once tight shield of public image was breaking. Daniel, of course, tried to play the victim too. He sold the motorcycle that had once been the shining jewel of his existence, claiming he was making a mature decision for the family. But by then, no one was buying the act. Without the spotlight and praise, he looked like what he always had been, entitled and unprepared. For me, life kept moving forward. My job blossomed into a promotion faster than I anticipated, thanks to the distressed business project I'd been working on. It turned out my personal scars had made me sharp, observant, and relentless in spotting financial manipulation. My bosses noticed. By the end of the year, I wasn't just stable, I was thriving. The last time I saw my parents in person was at my cousin Jenna's wedding. They approached me cautiously, no longer with anger, but with that brittle politeness people use when they're out of options. My mom's smile was tight, her eyes searching my face for any sign of weakness. "Ryan," she said softly, "we've all made mistakes. Maybe it's time to forgive and move on." I studied her for a long moment, the weight of years pressing down, then finally shook my head. "I did move on. You just weren't invited." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I saw the reality sink in. They no longer had power over me. No guilt to hold, no lies to twist, no strings to pull. As I turned and walked away, the chatter of the wedding filled the hall. Laughter, music, glasses clinking. It felt like the sound of a life I had finally claimed for myself. And that's when it hit me. Revenge hadn't been the binder, or the bank, or even the collapse of their lies. The real revenge was standing tall while they were left scrambling in the ruins of a world they had built on my back. I left the hall with my head high, and for the first time in years, the air felt light. Final line. As I stepped outside into the cool night, I whispered to myself, "Let him handle it." And this time, I knew they finally understood what that meant. My name's Jake, I'm 27, and I need to tell you about the night my family made me feel smaller than I've ever felt in my life. It was at my cousin's wedding, a big fancy event where everyone showed up dressed like they had just walked out of a magazine. I remember pulling up late in my old, beat-up car, the kind that rattled every time you turned the key, because I had barely scraped together enough money for gas just to make the drive. I had debated even showing up at all, but part of me didn't want to give my dad and the rest of them another reason to say I was too good for the family or ashamed of where I came from. The truth was, I wasn't ashamed of them. I was just tired of being the family punchline. As soon as I walked in, I felt those eyes on me. You know that sensation, when a room quiets just enough for people to look. My suit was a few years old, tighter around the shoulders than I remembered, but clean. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to blend in. But with my family, blending in was impossible. I hadn't exactly followed the path they wanted for me. I wasn't a doctor like my cousin, or a lawyer like my uncle. I wasn't even what my dad called stable. Instead, I'd been chasing contracts in the tech world, trying to start my own thing, pitching ideas to investors who didn't return calls, and spending nights in tiny apartments working until my eyes burned. To them, it looked like I was wasting my 20s. To me, it felt like I was betting everything on myself and losing more often than I won. Dinner was served, and I sat at the long table across from my dad, who was already in his element, laughing loudly, glass of wine in hand, soaking up attention like a spotlight belonged to him. He'd always been that way, the man who could turn any moment into a performance, usually at someone else's expense. And that night, I was his material. I could feel it before it happened, that prickle in my chest, the uneasy anticipation that I was about to be put on the spot. My dad leaned back in his chair, looked around the table, and then locked eyes with me. That grin of his, sharp as broken glass, spread across his face. Then, with a voice loud enough to silence the clinking of silverware, he said, "He thinks he'll ever be rich. He can't even afford the gas to drive here." The laughter was instant. My uncle slapped the table, my cousins leaned into each other, and even my mom tried to hide a smile behind her glass. It wasn't just laughter, it was the kind of laughter that slices, the kind where you know the joke is you and everyone's in on it. My stomach tightened, and for a second I couldn't breathe. I wanted to disappear, to melt right into the polished wood of that floor. But instead, I sat there frozen, my face hot, my hands gripping the fork like it was the only anchor I had left. Inside, though, something shifted. I'd been humiliated by my dad before, plenty of times. He had a way of turning my struggles into anecdotes for the family to laugh at, but this moment burned differently. Maybe it was the way everyone joined in. Maybe it was because deep down, I knew I was close to something big in my work, even if no one else could see it. Whatever it was, that laughter carved itself into me. And while they clinked glasses and went back to their conversations, I sat there in silence, a plan already taking root in my head, though I didn't even realize it at the time. I left the wedding that night earlier than I'd planned, slipping out while the music thumped and my dad danced with relatives like nothing had happened. My drive home was quiet except for the hum of my old car, the words echoing in my head. He thinks he'll ever be rich. Over and over, like a challenge. That was the night I made myself a promise, not out loud, not even whispered, but burned into me so deeply I could feel it in my bones. One day, I'd prove them wrong. One day, they'd regret ever laughing. But at that point, all I had was a promise, an empty gas tank, and a long road ahead. After the wedding, things didn't magically go back to normal, not that I expected them to. If anything, that night became ammunition. It wasn't just a one-off comment anymore. It was a story my dad and the others carried around like a party trick. Every time there was a family dinner, every birthday, every get-together, someone found a way to bring it up. "Hey Jake, you make it this time without running out of gas?" Or, "Careful, don't ask Jake to chip in. He's saving pennies for the fuel pump." They always said it with that playful tone, as if it was just family humor. But you can tell when you're the punchline and not a participant. The favoritism in my family had always been obvious, but it grew sharper after that. My cousin Mark, the groom from that wedding, became my dad's golden child. Mark was the model of success in their eyes: flashy job, big paycheck, and a willingness to remind people of it. Every time I sat in the same room with him, the comparisons came rolling out. Mark's already thinking about buying his second house. Mark's firm wants to send him to Europe for training. Mark just got his bonus. "Jake, maybe you should take some notes." They said it like encouragement, but the truth was, it was ridicule in disguise. I tried to laugh it off sometimes, force a smile, nod politely. But inside, it stung. It wasn't just my dad anymore. It was my whole family feeding into this image of me as the disappointment, the underachiever. My mom played her part too, though softer, in that guilt-laced way only a parent can. She'd call me up, not to check in, not to ask how I was doing, but to suggest I take a real job. "Jake, your father and I just want you to have stability," she'd say, her voice sweet but edged with disapproval. "You're smart, but smart doesn't pay the bills. Why not apply at the bank? They're hiring." And if I refused, if I dared to say I wanted to keep building what I was building, she'd sigh that heavy sigh, the one that said I was selfish, ungrateful, and destined to fail. The more I tried to explain what I was working on, the less they listened. To them, software contracts sounded like code for lazy excuses. I'd talk about late nights coding, pitching to investors, developing prototypes, and their eyes would glaze over before I could finish. But when Mark talked about billable hours or his firm's clients, suddenly everyone was all ears. It was like speaking two different languages, one they respected, one they mocked. Then came Thanksgiving. I remember sitting at that long dining table, the turkey steaming, the smell of stuffing heavy in the air. My aunt asked Mark to say grace. And of course, he slipped in a line about being thankful for opportunities and success. When it was over, my dad clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy. He knows how to build a future." Then, without missing a beat, he looked down the table at me and said, "Maybe one day, huh, Jake? If you stop wasting your time chasing pipe dreams." Everyone chuckled. My fork clinked against the plate, and I just sat there, staring at the food I couldn't taste. It wasn't just the joke. It was the way no one defended me. No one ever did. My sister avoided eye contact. My mom stayed quiet, and even my younger cousins had learned to join in, laughing along like it was tradition. And maybe it was. What cut deepest, though, came later that night when I was leaving. I overheard my dad talking to my uncle in the kitchen. He didn't know I was standing just out of sight. "Jake's never gonna make it," he said flatly. "He's got no discipline. Too proud to take real work, too stubborn to admit he's failing. He'll end up living off scraps if he keeps this up." My uncle murmured something back, but I couldn't hear it. All I heard was my dad's voice, and it hit me harder than I expected. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just jokes to him. He genuinely believed I was destined to fail. And worse, he wanted me to. My failure validated his narrative, his authority, his control. The more I tried to stand on my own, the more he wanted to see me fall flat on my face. After that, the dynamic only grew worse. Family gatherings became landmines. Every success I talked about, no matter how small, was dismissed. When I landed a freelance contract worth a few thousand, my dad waved it off like pocket change. That's not a real living, Jake. Call me when you're paying a mortgage. When I mentioned an investor meeting, my mom cut in with, "Don't get your hopes up, honey. You know how these things go." And when I once dared to share that I'd been talking with a company overseas about licensing my software, my cousin smirked and said, "Sounds like a scam to me." It was constant erosion, a drip of doubt, over and over, until I questioned myself every time I sat down at my desk. Nights became heavier. I'd work until 3 in the morning, code blurring in front of me, wondering if they were right, if maybe I was delusional. But then I'd remember the wedding, the laughter, my dad's smirk, and somehow, that sting kept me pushing forward. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to see, was that things were starting to shift behind the scenes. Slowly, quietly. But at that stage, all they saw was failure, and they never missed a chance to remind me of it. And then came the Christmas dinner, the one where the tension broke in a way I'll never forget. Christmas has always been strange in my family. It was supposed to be warm, full of laughter, presents, and that feeling of togetherness. But for me, it always carried this undercurrent of tension. That year, though, it wasn't just tension, it was the breaking point. I had debated not going at all. My apartment felt safer, quieter, and at least there, no one was waiting with sharpened tongues disguised as jokes. But when my mom called and said, "It would mean a lot if you came, Jake," I caved. I told myself I'd keep my head down, get through dinner, and slip out early. The house was glowing when I arrived, string lights around the porch, the tree sparkling through the window, laughter spilling out into the cold night air. I walked in with a bottle of wine I could barely afford, hoping at least it would look like I was trying. The living room was already full, cousins and uncles in sweaters, kids running around with sticky fingers from sugar cookies. My dad spotted me immediately, that familiar smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Well, look who finally made it. Did the car even survive the drive?" A few chuckles rippled through the room. I forced a smile, shrugged it off, and handed my mom the wine. Dinner started well enough. I stayed quiet, listened more than I spoke, tried not to give anyone a reason to turn the spotlight on me. But it was inevitable. Halfway through, the conversation turned to money, as it always did. My uncle was talking about his year-end bonus. My cousin Mark was bragging about his promotion, and before long, someone asked me how things were going. I should have known better than to answer honestly, but a small part of me still wanted recognition, still wanted my family to see me as more than a failure. So I told them about a contract I was negotiating. It wasn't signed yet, but it was big, life-changing if it went through. I explained, cautiously, how the company was interested in buying the rights to one of my software tools, how talks were serious, and how, for once, it felt real. For a second, there was silence. Then my dad barked out a laugh, so sharp it cut through the entire table. "You hear that? Jake's got another one of his million-dollar deals lined up." He shook his head, grinning as if it was the funniest thing he'd heard all year. "Son, we've heard this story before. Don't count chickens that aren't even eggs yet." The table laughed with him. My cousin leaned over to another and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "I'll believe it when he shows up in a new car." Even my mom, who usually at least tried to soften the blows, sighed and muttered, "Jake, maybe keep these dreams to yourself until they're real." But that wasn't the betrayal. Not yet. That came after dinner, when presents were being exchanged. I hadn't expected much, I never did, but I bought a few small gifts for the kids, hoping at least they'd smile. When it came to me, though, my dad handed me a small box, wrapped hastily in reused paper. Everyone leaned in, already grinning like they knew the punchline. I opened it and froze. Inside was a plastic toy car, the kind you'd buy in the bargain bin at a gas station. On the roof of the car, my dad had taped a folded-up $5 bill. "Gas money," he announced, and the room erupted. Full-on laughter, people slapping the table, wiping tears from their eyes. My cousins actually clapped. It was cruel, planned, and public, meant to humiliate, not tease. I stared at that little car in my hands, my chest tight, my throat burning. My mom tried to hide her smile, but I caught it. My sister shook her head, but said nothing. Not a single person spoke up for me. Not one. I don't even remember standing up, but suddenly I was on my feet, the toy car still in my hand. My voice came out low, shaking more with anger than embarrassment. You think this is funny? You really think this is what family is supposed to be? The laughter quieted, awkwardness spreading across the room. My dad leaned back in his chair, smirking, unbothered. Don't be so sensitive, Jake. It's a joke. Lighten up. But it wasn't a joke. Not to me. It was the moment everything snapped. That toy car, that $5 bill, it wasn't just a gag gift. It was proof. Proof that to them, I wasn't Jake, their son, their cousin, their brother. I was the running gag, the failure they could all bond over at my expense. I left without another word. I didn't even take my coat, just walked out into the freezing night with the toy car still in my hand. By the time I got back to my apartment, I couldn't even cry. I just sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, the car on the table beside me. Something in me hardened that night. Because in that moment, I knew two things. One, I was done letting them define me. And two, if I ever did land the kind of contract I was chasing, they would never see it coming. And then, just a few months later, something happened that would change everything. The weeks after that Christmas dinner felt like walking through fog. Every memory of that night replayed on a loop. The toy car, the laughter, the smirk on my dad's face. I'd set the little car on my desk, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I couldn't stop looking at it. It was a reminder, equal parts wound and fuel. I'd wake up, see it first thing in the morning, and instead of motivating me, it sat like a weight on my chest. I wish I could say I bounced back quickly, but the truth is, I didn't. January was brutal. The contract I'd been negotiating fell through. The company backed out at the last minute, deciding to build their own version instead of licensing mine. I'd put months of work into that deal, pitching, revising, staying up until dawn fixing bugs, and in the end, I got nothing. Just another disappointment, one my family would never let me live down if they found out. Money got tight, tighter than it had ever been. Rent was overdue, utilities stacked up, and there were nights when I had to choose between buying groceries or keeping the heat on. My apartment was small to begin with, but in winter, when the cold seeped through the thin walls, it felt like a cave. I'd sit wrapped in 2 blankets, my laptop balanced on my knees, coding with fingers stiff from the chill. Freelance gigs trickled in, but they barely kept me afloat. Sometimes I'd stare at job postings, bank teller, office assistant, retail manager, and wonder if my family was right. Maybe I was chasing something that wasn't meant for me. Maybe all those late nights, all that stubborn belief, was just foolishness. I'd hover over the apply button more times than I can count, but every time, I pulled back. Because the thought of giving in, of walking into the next family dinner and telling them I'd taken a safe, stable job, made me feel like I'd be handing them victory on a silver platter. The lowest point came in February. My car finally gave out, the engine coughing its last breath on the side of the road. The repair cost was more than the car was worth, and for a few weeks, I walked everywhere, grocery store, bus stop, even meetings. I'd pull my hood up and trudge through the snow, trying to ignore the stares of people in warm cars flying by. And each time, the echo of my dad's voice played in my head. He can't even afford the gas to drive here. The cruel irony was almost unbearable. Isolation set in too. I stopped answering family calls. My mom would leave voicemails. Jake, your dad didn't mean anything by it. You're too sensitive. But I couldn't bring myself to listen to them fully. My sister texted once, saying she thought the gift was out of line. But even then, she added, you know how dad is. Just let it go. That was the thing. Everyone excused him, always. And I was tired of carrying the weight of being the one expected to forgive. But in that silence, something began to shift. Small, almost imperceptible at first. With no car, no distractions, and no family pressing in on me, I had nothing left but the work. I buried myself in it. Nights blurred into mornings. I pored over lines of code until my eyes stung, reworked pitches, and started networking in every way I could think of. I joined forums, cold emailed companies, sent prototypes to anyone who would look. I stopped chasing the idea of impressing my family and started chasing the idea of survival, for myself, not for them. It was during one of those long nights, staring at my screen at 3 a.m., that I realized something. All those failures, all those rejections, they'd sharpened me. Every no had forced me to refine my work. Every collapse had pushed me to find new solutions. The ridicule had left scars, sure, but it had also given me a kind of resilience I hadn't recognized before. By spring, things weren't suddenly perfect, but doors began to creak open. A small company overseas expressed interest in my software. They weren't ready to commit, but they wanted to keep talking. A startup in the US asked for a demo. Nothing concrete yet, but for the first time in a long while, there was movement. And in the quiet of my apartment, with the toy car still sitting on my desk, I began to plan. Not just for contracts or deals, but for something bigger. A life where I didn't need their approval. A future where their laughter wouldn't matter. I didn't know how or when it would come together, but I knew this much. The next time they saw me, I wouldn't be the punchline anymore. What I didn't know then was just how quickly everything was about to change, and how the very thing they mocked me for would become the reason they came crawling back. By the time spring melted into summer, I had settled into a strange rhythm, half survival, half obsession. My days were quiet, stripped down to the bare essentials: code, pitch, sleep, repeat. I was still broke, still walking to the store with grocery bags cutting into my hands. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of momentum building beneath my feet. It was fragile, like the first crack of light under a locked door, but it was there. The overseas company that had shown initial interest asked me to refine the demo. I poured everything into it, rebuilding features, tightening performance, cutting away the unnecessary. When I sent it back, they didn't reply right away. Days passed, then weeks. I tried not to get my hopes up, but when their email finally arrived, my hands shook as I opened it. They wanted a second meeting, this time with their full development team. At the same time, the US startup I'd pitched to ask me to fly out and present. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't even have a working car, and now I was scrambling to afford a flight. I maxed out a credit card, told myself it was do or die, and boarded a plane with nothing but a carry-on bag and a laptop that looked embarrassingly worn next to the sleek machines in their office. But when I stood in front of that team and walked them through what I'd built, something shifted. They weren't smiling politely, waiting for me to finish. They were leaning in, asking questions, scribbling notes. For the first time, I wasn't the odd one out. I was the guy with the answers. That summer became a blur of calls, meetings, and prototypes. I was running on fumes, still eating ramen and skipping meals, but doors that had always been locked were finally opening. And with each small success, I felt myself standing taller, not just in meetings, but in life. The sting of my family's laughter dulled, not gone, but replaced with something stronger, a quiet, stubborn confidence that I was onto something real. By August, I landed my first sizable contract. It wasn't millions, not yet, but it was enough to pay off overdue bills, clear the credit card debt, and finally buy a used car that didn't sound like it was dying every time I turned the key. I'll never forget sitting behind the wheel of that car for the first time, the smell of worn leather filling the air, thinking, this is mine. I did this. Not a gift, not a handout, mine. I didn't tell my family about any of it. After Christmas, I'd gone quiet, stopped volunteering updates, stopped trying to prove myself. And strangely enough, that silence became power. They still thought I was scraping by, still whispered about me at dinners I didn't attend, still painted me as the black sheep. But while they mocked, I was building. Then came autumn, and with it, a turning point I never saw coming. The overseas company called again. They were impressed, not just with the software, but with my persistence. They wanted to discuss a licensing agreement. I listened as they explained the numbers, my heart pounding, and when the call ended, I sat there in stunned silence. It wasn't finalized, but if it went through, it would be worth more than everything I'd ever made in my life combined. That was the moment I realized something. My family had spent years defining me as the failure, the joke, the one who couldn't even afford gas. But here I was, sitting on the edge of a deal that could change my life forever. And they had no idea. For the first time in my life, I didn't crave their approval. I didn't need to run back and announce, look, I did it. The thought of keeping it quiet, of letting them go on believing I was still struggling while my world was transforming behind the scenes, gave me a thrill I hadn't expected. I worked harder than ever. The licensing deal stretched on for months. Lawyers, negotiations, revisions, but with every step, it felt more real. And while the pieces came together, I started preparing for the day it would all be official. The day I could stand, not in their shadow, but far above it. That fall, I walked into a family gathering for the first time in months. I didn't say much. I wore the same old clothes, drove the same modest car, and let them believe what they wanted. My dad still threw his jabs. "Jake, you working on another one of those magic deals?" And the table still laughed. But this time, I didn't flinch. I just smiled, because I knew something they didn't. The laughter wouldn't last forever. And then, one crisp October morning, the call came. The contract was finalized. Signed. Sealed. Worth $4.3 million. I sat there staring at the papers, heart hammering, tears threatening to fall, and the first thought that flashed through my head wasn't relief or joy. It was the memory of that toy car, the $5 bill taped to its roof, and the sound of my family's laughter echoing in my ears. That was the day everything changed, not just for me, but for them too. They just didn't know it yet. When the ink dried on that contract, I thought the hard part was over. In reality, it was only the beginning. Overnight, my life shifted from survival to strategy. $4.3 million wasn't just money. It was leverage, opportunity, freedom. And if there was one thing I had learned from years of being the family punchline, it was how to keep my cards close until it was time to lay them down. The first thing I did was protect myself. I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in contracts and asset protection. Together, we set up an LLC and funneled the licensing money into it. Then we established a trust. I didn't want a single dollar tied directly to my personal account where my family, or anyone else for that matter, could sniff around. Every move was deliberate, quiet, methodical. If my family ever found out, it wouldn't be because I slipped. I also hired an accountant, a financial advisor, and eventually, even a business manager. They taught me things I'd never known about investments, about minimizing taxes legally, about making money work for me instead of constantly chasing after it. Sitting in those meetings, I felt like a different person. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to keep the lights on. I was the one with options, the one in control. But I didn't change my lifestyle, at least not right away. I still lived in the same modest apartment, still drove the same used car I'd bought after the first contract. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, though, everything had. I could feel it in the way I carried myself, the way I spoke in meetings, even the way I looked in the mirror. That quiet confidence wasn't forced anymore. It was real. And then, slowly, the first cracks started to appear in the family's narrative. It began with small things. My sister called one night, her tone unusually curious. "So, what have you been up to lately?" she asked, as if she'd suddenly realized she hadn't kept tabs on me. I gave her vague answers, just working on some projects, keeping busy, and she pressed a little, but I didn't give in. That curiosity, though, told me something. Word was starting to spread. A week later, my mom left a voicemail. "Jake, your father and I have been talking, and we'd love for you to come over for dinner. It's been too long. We miss you." Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. Not the usual sighs, not the subtle digs. Sweetness. It was rare, and it set off alarm bells immediately. Then came Thanksgiving, the same holiday that had once broken me with ridicule. I wasn't planning to attend, but my lawyer suggested something that stuck with me. Sometimes, silence is the strongest statement. But sometimes, showing up when they expect you beaten and letting them underestimate you, that's even stronger. So I went. Same modest car, same old suit, nothing flashy. The moment I walked in, though, I could sense it. The air was different. My cousins, usually smug and dismissive, seemed strangely polite. My uncle slapped me on the back and asked how work was going. Not with mockery, but with interest. Even my dad, who usually greeted me with a cutting remark, just gave a nod. I didn't know if they had caught wind of the deal or if it was just coincidence. But for the first time in years, I wasn't met with open laughter. During dinner, my mom leaned in and said softly, "Jake, we're proud of you. We know you've been working hard." I almost choked on my food. Proud. This from the woman who once told me to stop dreaming and apply at a bank. Something had shifted, but I kept my face neutral. I wasn't about to show my hand. The real moment came after dessert. My dad pulled me aside, his tone oddly measured. "So, son, I hear you've been making some moves. Big moves." He didn't say where he'd heard it, and I didn't ask. I just shrugged. "I've been keeping busy." His eyes narrowed, that calculating look I'd seen 1,000 times. For years, I'd been the source of his jokes, the son who proved him right every time I stumbled. Now, For the first time, I could see it in his face. He wasn't laughing. He was assessing. That was when I knew. The balance of power had shifted. They didn't see me as the failure anymore. They saw me as an opportunity. And the same people who once mocked me for every dollar I didn't have would soon be the ones begging for a piece of what I had built. What they didn't realize was that I had already decided I would never let them. Because I hadn't just built a company or signed a contract. I'd built walls, legal, financial, emotional. I was no longer the boy at the table with his face burning red from their laughter. I was the man holding the cards, waiting for the perfect moment to play them. And that moment was coming sooner than they thought. The funny thing about revenge is that it doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, like waiting for a seed to sprout. And by the time it grows, the people you're targeting don't even realize it's about to choke them. That's exactly how it felt as the months after Thanksgiving rolled on. I kept my life low-key. Same apartment, same car, same clothes. On the surface, I was still Jake, the guy they thought was barely scraping by. But behind the curtain, my world was expanding. My company grew as more contracts rolled in. The licensing deal blossomed into something even larger, and I reinvested wisely. For the first time, I had employees working under me, people who looked to me for direction. It was surreal. The same Jake who used to walk through the snow just to buy groceries was now signing paychecks for other people. And then, right on cue, my family came knocking. It started with my cousin Mark, the golden child. He reached out with a cheerful text. "Hey man, we should grab coffee sometime. Haven't caught up in forever." My gut told me it wasn't coffee he was after. I agreed to meet him anyway. At the cafe, he kept the small talk short before launching into it. He was looking to invest in up-and-coming ventures and thought maybe I had something worth looking at. I sipped my coffee slowly, hiding my smile. "That's interesting, Mark. But I'm not looking for investors right now." His face faltered just a bit before he forced a smile back. Sure, I get it. Just keep me in mind." Not long after, my sister called. She sounded nervous, like she was rehearsing lines. She talked about how proud she was of me, how she always knew I'd make it if I stuck with it. Then she mentioned her husband had been laid off, and things were tight. "If there's any way you could help us out, even just a small loan, we'd pay you back so fast," she said. I kept my voice calm, even warm. "I wish I could, but everything I'm doing right now is tied up in the business. Liquidity's an issue, you know how it is." She didn't, of course, but she nodded along like she did. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while, the irony sinking in. The final piece came with my parents. My mom invited me over for dinner again, this time practically gushing over the phone about how she missed me, how the family wasn't the same without me. Against my better judgment, I went. The evening began pleasantly enough. No jabs, no jokes. My dad poured me a drink, clapped me on the shoulder, even asked about my work in a way that almost sounded respectful. But I could feel it coming, like thunder building on the horizon. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and we sat in the living room, my dad finally leaned forward. "Jake," he said, voice low and serious, "your mother and I have been talking. We know you've had some success. And listen, that's great. Really. But you know, family sticks together. We've always been there for each other, and now it's your turn to step up." I almost laughed at the sheer gall of it. Always been there for each other? Where were they when I was walking to meetings in the snow? Where were they when I was eating ramen in a freezing apartment? Where were they when they taped $5 to a toy car and called it my gift? But I didn't laugh. I leaned back, swirling the drink in my glass, and said, "What exactly are you asking for?" My mom jumped in. "Well, the house needs some repairs, and with your father thinking about retirement, things are tight. It's nothing crazy. We just thought you could help out, you know, since you're doing so well now." And there it was. The begging. The shift I'd been waiting for. I let the silence hang long enough for it to sting. Then I smiled, calm, steady, almost gentle. "I understand where you're coming from. But no, I can't help with that." My dad's jaw tightened. "Can't or won't?" "Won't," I said simply. The room went still. My mom's face fell, her eyes wide with shock. My dad's smirk, the one he'd worn my whole life, flickered for the first time. He tried to recover, tried to laugh it off. "Don't be ridiculous. You've got more money than you know what to do with. Don't play games." I set my glass down and leaned forward. "Do you remember that toy car you gave me last Christmas? The one with the $5 bill taped to it?" My dad's face froze. That was the night I stopped seeing you as parents and started seeing you as obstacles. You wanted me to fail. You laughed at me, dismissed me, humiliated me. And now you come asking for help. I shook my head slowly. No, you made your choice. Now I'm making mine. For once, they had no comeback. No laughter. No jokes. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from money, but the kind that comes from finally turning the tables. What they didn't realize then was that this was only the beginning. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make sure every single one of them understood exactly what it meant to mock the man who built himself from nothing. The silence in that living room was thick, almost suffocating. For the first time in my life, my dad didn't have a quick-witted jab, and my mom couldn't smooth things over with soft words. I could see it dawning on them, that the son they once laughed at, mocked, dismissed, had slipped completely out of their control. My mom tried first, her voice trembling. "Jake, you don't mean that. We're family. We were only joking all those years. You know your father's sense of humor. We love you." I looked at her evenly. Love isn't humiliating your child in front of a room full of relatives. Love isn't making them feel like the punchline of every story. Love isn't standing silent while it happens, year after year. She fell quiet, her face pale, her hands twisting the hem of her sweater. My dad finally spoke, his voice hard, defensive. "You're bitter. You're holding on to grudges. We gave you everything growing up, food, a roof, an education. And now you've got money and you think you're better than us?" I leaned forward, my tone calm but sharper than any insult. "Better than you? No, but I am done with you. And don't get it twisted, you didn't give me everything. You gave me obstacles. You gave me doubt. You gave me a fire so hot it burned me into the man sitting in front of you now. Every time you laughed at me, every time you dismissed me, every time you told me I wasn't enough, you built me. So if I'm better at anything, it's because of what you tried to destroy." He opened his mouth to argue, but I stood, cutting him off. "Here's the truth. You taught me I couldn't count on family. And now, when you need me most, you can't count on me either." I left them sitting there, stunned and silent. And for the first time in years, I felt light walking out of that house. No more weight on my chest. No more invisible chains tying me to their approval. I was free. Word spread quickly after that. My sister stopped calling when she realized help wasn't coming. My cousin Mark sent one more message about an investment opportunity, but when I ignored it, he didn't bother again. The family dinners carried on without me, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the butt of the joke. I was the ghost of what they'd lost, the reminder of how badly they'd misplayed their hand. As for my parents, they tried a few more times. My mom left long voicemails about forgiveness, about family being all we have. My dad, predictably, left one message where he raged, calling me ungrateful, selfish, a disgrace. But I didn't return the calls. I didn't need to. Their laughter had turned into silence, and that was enough. Months later, I was at a dinner with my team, the people who actually believed in me, who had worked beside me to make everything possible, when I reached into my pocket and felt something small. The toy car. I still carried it sometimes, not as a wound, but as a reminder. I set it on the table, and one of my employees asked what it was. "Motivation," I said simply, and slipped it back into my pocket. And that was the truth. The little plastic car, the laughter, the humiliation, it had all been fuel. They thought they'd broken me. Instead, they forged me. That night, as I drove home in my new car, quiet, sleek, nothing flashy but entirely mine, I realized something. Revenge didn't come in screaming matches or dramatic takedowns. It came in living so well, so far beyond their reach, that they had to choke on the very words they once used to tear me down. And for the first time, I smiled at the memory of their laughter. Because now, it wasn't on me. It was on them. Final line. I no longer carried the weight of their words. Only the freedom of knowing I'd turned their mockery into my empire and left them to sit in the ruins of their own laughter. You know that gut punch you get when someone you love shows you exactly who they are? Yeah, that happened to me this year. And the worst part is, I saw it coming and still tried to believe they'd be better. My name's Aaron, I'm 29, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. That title will always belong to my younger brother, Brandon, but definitely the one they leaned on when things got messy. I wasn't a genius or anything. I didn't invent an app or flip real estate or win the lottery. I just got really good at saving, budgeting, and living under my means. I work in cybersecurity for a mid-sized tech firm, and between the long hours and my freelance gigs, I've built a decent safety net for myself. Nothing flashy. No sports car or condo with floor-to-ceiling windows. Just a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, an emergency fund, and peace of mind. My parents always painted themselves as old school, hardworking, prideful. They owned a small hardware store for most of my childhood, the kind of place with flickering fluorescent lights and a tiny radio always playing 80s rock in the background. My mom ran the register, my dad stocked the shelves, and Brandon and I would hang out in the back doing homework while customers trickled in and out. They worked hard, no doubt. But money was always tight, and there was always this undercurrent of stress beneath everything. Anytime I asked for something, new shoes, birthday party, school trip, I got the same line. We're not the Rockefellers, Aaron. As we got older, things changed. The store shut down after a Home Depot opened 2 blocks away. My dad tried picking up some contractor work, but struggled with back pain. My mom bounced between cashier jobs at the grocery store and temp gigs. Meanwhile, Brandon drifted. He was always charming, always had a new scheme, new hustle, new thing that was going to make him rich. Crypto, drop shipping, Amazon FBA, selling supplements online, you name it, he tried it. None of it stuck. But he had this way of making everyone feel sorry for him when things didn't work out, especially our parents. I remember one Christmas about 4 years ago. Brandon showed up late, no gifts, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. My mom hovered over him like a wounded bird had landed in her kitchen. He's going through a hard time, she whispered, like that explained everything. I offered to let him crash at my place for a few weeks. He stayed for 5 months, never paid rent, left his dishes in the sink, burned a hole in my couch with a vape. When I finally asked him to move out, my mom told me I was cold, like I'd kicked a dog out into the rain. I don't say any of this to make myself look like a saint. I've made mistakes. I've been too generous sometimes, too quiet. But I always figured that's what family does. You help when you can, you step back when you need to. I just didn't realize how one-sided that philosophy would turn out to be. The thing that set everything in motion happened in June. I'd just gotten back from a work trip to Seattle and was sitting on my porch drinking tea when my mom called. She rarely calls, usually just texts, call me, and waits. So when her name lit up my phone, I answered right away. Hey mom, everything okay? There was a pause, then a shaky breath. Aaron, your dad and I are in a bit of a situation. My stomach dropped. What kind of situation? Bills, she said. We're behind on the electric, the car payment, the mortgage. It's just been piling up. Your dad's been trying to pick up more shifts, but his back. He can barely get out of bed some mornings. That image alone hit hard. My dad was a proud man. The kind who never asked for help, even when he probably should have. The thought of him struggling to walk made my throat tighten. I'm sorry, I said. Is there anything I can do? Another pause. We hate asking, honey. You know we do. But we're about $5,000 short this month. Just to get caught up. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. My heart pounded. $5,000 was no joke, even for me. I had it, but it wasn't money I could toss around lightly. That was my buffer, my peace of mind. Still, I didn't hesitate. I can send it, I said. Today. There was a pause on the other end. Then, suddenly, she burst into tears. Oh, sweetheart. Thank you. I knew we could count on you. I promise we'll pay you back. We just need to get through this month. I told her not to worry about it. I told myself it was the right thing to do. I went inside, transferred the money, and texted her the confirmation. The next day she didn't call, or the day after that. But on the 3rd day, I opened Instagram while waiting for my morning coffee to brew. And there it was. A picture of Brandon. Sunglasses on, shirtless, smiling wide with a cocktail in hand. Caption, Island life, baby. Palm tree tropical drink hashtag Caribbean vibes hashtag Familivike. I blinked. No way. I clicked his profile. Post after post from the last 2 days. A picture of my mom in a floppy sun hat sipping something pink. My dad lounging in a beach chair with a cigar. Brandon filming a slow-motion video of a resort pool with steel drum music playing in the background. My stomach twisted. I double-checked the date on the wire transfer, June 15th. The first post? June 17th. 2 days after I sent $5,000 they said was for overdue bills. I just sat there, holding my phone like it might burst into flames. I didn't say anything. Not that day. Not the next. I told myself maybe it was some weird coincidence. Maybe a friend paid for it. Maybe they won it. Maybe anything. Anything but the most obvious explanation. But as the days went by, the posts kept coming. My mom tagged in a beachside spa. My dad in a video dancing to a reggae band. Brandon bragging about the all-you-can-eat buffet and executive suite upgrade. And I kept quiet. Until 3 weeks later, when I got another call. This time it was my dad. "Hey, sport," he said casually, like nothing had happened. "Listen, your mom and I are trying to figure out this tax thing, and we might be in a little hole again. Nothing crazy. Just wondering if you could spot us another $2,000 until August." I didn't answer right away. I could feel my jaw clenching. "You okay?" he asked. I was quiet for a second longer. Then I said, "Sure. But can I ask something first?" "Of course. Did you use the last 5,000 for bills? Or for the Caribbean?" There was a pause. A long one. The kind that tells you everything before they even say a word. Then he cleared his throat. Look, Aaron, we needed a break. Your mom's been under so much stress. The doctor said she had to get her blood pressure down. Brandon found a deal, and we figured. You figured a resort vacation was more important than paying the mortgage? Aaron, don't be dramatic. I'm not. I'm just trying to understand how I went from helping you keep the lights on to funding your beach trip. That was the moment everything started to shift. When I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about respect. About how they saw me. About the fact that for all my sacrifices, all my efforts to be the responsible one, they still saw me as the fallback plan. The guy with the extra money. The one who would always say yes. But not anymore. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I just ended the call. And that's when I started planning. Not revenge. Not yet. But something was brewing. Something quiet. Something patient. Because I knew, sooner or later, they'd ask again. And the next time, well, let's just say I wasn't going to be their ATM anymore. But that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part came later. Much later. When they came to me for something way bigger than money. And by then, it was already too late. I wish I could say that was the last time they ever asked for money. That after the phone call with my dad, they realized they'd crossed a line and maybe, just maybe, felt a little guilty. But no, that would be too easy. My family doesn't really operate on guilt. They operate on entitlement dressed up as need, and on expectations that never seem to run out. After I hung up that day, I didn't hear from either of them for nearly 2 weeks. No check-in texts. No half-hearted, "How are you?" Nothing. It was like the moment I stopped being useful, I disappeared from their radar. Which, to be honest, didn't surprise me. I'd gotten used to the pattern. I was the family's safety net. Quiet, dependable, invisible until needed. Like a fire extinguisher in a glass case. Break only in case of emergency. But 2 weeks later, Brandon texted me out of nowhere. No context, just, "Yo, any chance you can help me out with something? Need a loan for like a month." Nothing crazy. I didn't respond. A day passed. Then another. Then a follow-up. "Seriously, man. Just $1,200. I'll flip it in 2 weeks. Got this sneaker plug that's about to blow up. I'll even throw in interest." Interest. From Brandon. That alone was hilarious. The guy once borrowed my car and returned it with 2 parking tickets and no gas, then told me, "You should have warned me about that street." I didn't reply. Not because I was being petty, but because I was done. Or at least, I thought I was. That weekend, I got invited to a family barbecue at my parents' house. Nothing fancy, my mom said. Just burgers, hot dogs, a little music. Be nice to have everyone together again. And even though I had every reason to say no, something in me, maybe habit, maybe hope, said yes. I drove over around 4 p.m., carrying a pasta salad I made from scratch. When I walked into the backyard, it hit me like a wall. Laughter, music, the smell of grilled meat, the clinking of drinks. My parents, beaming. Brandon, already half a beer deep, flipping burgers like he was born for it. Aaron, my mom squealed, rushing over with a hug. You look skinny. Are you eating? Hi, Mom, I said, trying to smile. She took the salad from my hands. What is this? Oh, honey, you didn't have to bring anything. We've got more than enough. I looked around. The table was overflowing. Ribs, wings, shrimp skewers, expensive-looking desserts. I spotted bottles of Grey Goose and a cooler full of imported beer. Definitely nothing fancy. Brandon sauntered over, spatula in hand. There he is. The man, the myth, the money tree. I blinked. What? He grinned, like it was a joke. Kidding, bro, relax. Come grab a drink. We got that IPA you like. You still on that fancy beer kick? I didn't answer. Just nodded and sat down at the edge of the yard, sipping a warm soda while kids ran past me playing tag. Every now and then, someone would ask how work was. I'd answer politely, but mostly I just watched. My dad laughing with Brandon like they were business partners. My mom fussing over Brandon's plate. Want more ribs, sweetheart? While mine stayed empty. The cousins talking about Brandon's new business and how he was really turning things around. No one mentioned the $5,000. No one brought up the Caribbean. No one asked how I was. And I sat there thinking, wow, I don't belong here. Not really. Not in the way I thought. But the real moment? The breaking moment? That came after dinner. Everyone had eaten. The sun was dipping low. Brandon called for attention, clinking his beer bottle against a fork like he was toasting a wedding. Hey, everyone, quick thing, he said. So, some of you already know this, but I wanted to make it official. He pulled out a small black box and turned to his girlfriend, Cassie. I didn't even know he was dating anyone seriously. Cass, baby, you've been with me through the lowest lows and the highest highs, and I want to build a future with you. My heart stopped. He got down on one knee. Cassie gasped. People around us screamed. Someone dropped their plate. Will you marry me? She sobbed and nodded. They kissed. Applause erupted. My mom started crying, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. My dad patted Brandon on the back like he'd just won the Nobel Prize. And I just sat there, stunned. Not because of the proposal, but because of what came next. My mom stood up with a giddy smile and raised her glass. We're so excited to help them get started, she said. And we've decided to contribute to their wedding fund. $10,000 to help them build the day of their dreams. More clapping. Cheers. Cassie covered her mouth in disbelief. And I felt like I'd been slapped. $10,000. 10,000. The same parents who told me they couldn't pay their electric bill. The same ones who cried on the phone, begging for $5,000 to keep the house. And now they were handing Brandon $10,000 for a wedding? It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about what it meant. It meant I was a wallet, not a son. A silent investor in someone else's spotlight. And Brandon, golden boy, failed entrepreneur, irresponsible failure, was still the favorite. Always had been. Always would be. I stood up slowly and walked inside, needing a break from the noise. My chest felt tight. I stared at a framed photo on the hallway wall. Me at my college graduation. My parents weren't at the ceremony. Said it was too far and too expensive to travel. I remember sitting alone in my cap and gown, watching other families cheer while I took a selfie and went home. But they were here now, fully present, wallets open, proud beyond words. I leaned against the counter, trying to breathe. That's when I heard the voices. Brandon and my mom, in the kitchen. He doesn't even look happy, Brandon muttered. You think he's mad? He's always been like that, my mom said. Too serious. Honestly, I wish he'd loosen up. He's got a good job, no kids, no mortgage. What does he even need all that money for? Brandon chuckled. Exactly. I could flip that 10 grand into 50 if he'd just give it to me. He's too stingy for that. But it's okay. We'll figure it out. I backed away. My ears burned. My vision blurred. I felt something inside me snap. Not a loud, violent break, but the quiet click of a door locking shut. I walked out the front door without saying goodbye. No one noticed. No one followed. That was the moment everything changed. Because up until then, I'd always believed that maybe, just maybe, they didn't realize what they were doing. That maybe their favoritism was unconscious, a bad habit they didn't mean to lean into. But hearing them talk about me like that, like I was hoarding money for fun, like I owed them something, that was betrayal. And not just any betrayal. It was the kind that makes you sit down in your car for half an hour, staring at the dashboard, wondering how long you've been blind to it. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept replaying the moment. The toast. The proposal. The $10,000. My mom's voice in the kitchen. What does he even need all that money for? Like I didn't live alone. Like I didn't bust my back saving. Like I hadn't bailed them out more than once. I woke up the next morning to a text from Brandon. Yo bro, sorry if we caught you off guard. You good? Wanted to ask you something later this week. Nothing major. Hit me up. I didn't respond. But that's something he wanted to ask me. That's what pushed everything over the edge. Because a week later, he showed up at my house. Uninvited. Wearing a fresh new watch and a grin like nothing had happened. And when he told me what he wanted, let's just say that was the last time he ever walked through my front door. I opened the door just enough to block most of the entry with my body. It was a Saturday morning, gray and humid, and I had been in the middle of cleaning out my kitchen cabinets, something I did when I needed to feel in control. There he was, Brandon. Hoodie, joggers, new white sneakers, and a smug little smile that had aged poorly with time. Yo, finally, he said, like I owed him my Saturday. Been texting you all week, man. You good? I didn't answer. Just raised an eyebrow. He held up a to-go coffee tray like it was a peace offering. Brought you a flat white. You still drink these, right? I didn't move. He shifted his weight and laughed awkwardly. Come on, don't make me stand out here like a weirdo. I could have shut the door. I should have. But I stepped aside. He walked in like he owned the place. Same as he had 5 years ago, when he moved in for a week or two and stayed for nearly half a year. This time he made a beeline for the kitchen and dropped the coffee on the counter without asking. Place looks good, he said, peeking into the living room. Still got that same couch? Man, you need an upgrade. I saw this sectional on Facebook Marketplace. Real nice. You should let me hook you up. I stayed quiet. He sat down at the counter and finally got to the point. So, listen, I've been working on something new. Like, actually solid. A real plan this time. Cassie's cousin runs this events company. Weddings, corporate gigs, that kind of thing, and they're expanding into luxury rentals. Chairs, tables, linens, tents, you name it. High-margin stuff. Anyway, they need a partner for the buy-in. 50-50. I knew where this was going. Brandon leaned forward like he was about to share the cure for cancer. So, here's the play. I put in $5,000. You match it with 5, and we're co-owners. Passive income, bro. They already have bookings for the summer. It's a no-brainer. I stared at him. You just got engaged. Didn't mom and dad give you $10,000 for the wedding? He grinned. Yeah, but Cassie's set on this destination thing. Bali or Mexico, or whatever. So we're saving that for the venue and flights. This investment is separate. Trust me, I'm thinking long-term now. I said nothing. I'll pay you back in 3 months, he added. With interest. Real interest this time. Like you paid back the car repairs? Or the $2,000 I spotted you in 2019? Or the rent you never paid when you lived here? He laughed like I was bringing up inside jokes. Come on, man. That was forever ago. I just looked at him. No anger. No raised voice. Just silence. Brandon's smile faltered. What? He asked. You don't believe in me? I took a slow breath and walked to the sink. I believe in people who show they can follow through, I said. Not ones who show up when they need something. He stood. The smile was gone now, replaced by something sour. Wow. Okay. That's how it is. I didn't answer. He grabbed his untouched coffee from the counter. You know what, man? Forget it. I thought you were family. I let that one hang in the air. Then I said, yeah, so did I. He left. No slamming door, no dramatic exit. Just silence. The kind that doesn't come with relief, only clarity. That day marked a shift. Not loud, not theatrical, but real. I wasn't going to be their fallback anymore. And that decision didn't come with applause. It came with silence. Loneliness. Second-guessing. Because cutting off family, especially when they don't even realize they're the problem, feels like amputating a limb while people tell you you're just being sensitive. The first month after that was rough. The text slowed, then stopped. My mom sent a couple messages. Are you okay? And we miss you. But they weren't followed up. No calls. No visits. It was like I'd flipped an invisible switch and disappeared from their family map. At work, I kept my head down. Logged hours, fixed problems, ran security drills. On paper, everything was fine. But inside, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a field after a tornado, alone, shaken, and not sure which way was up. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the loss of something deeper. A belief I didn't even realize I'd been holding on to. That someday my parents would see me. Really see me. Not as a wallet, not as a safety net, but as a son worth respecting. That hope had been quietly keeping me going for years. And now it was gone. I'd hit bottom. Not financially. I still had my emergency fund, still had my house, my job, my routines. But emotionally, I was depleted. There were nights I'd come home and just sit on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, staring at the floor, wondering if I'd overreacted, wondering if I should have just said yes, wondering if being the responsible one was really worth it if it meant being alone. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's solid. You can build from it. And slowly, that's what I did. Not with some big, inspirational comeback. No sudden promotions or viral startup success. Just small, steady steps. I started going to the gym again. Not for aesthetics. Just to feel something shift. I woke up early, lifted heavy things, and walked out with shaking arms and a clearer mind. I began cooking real meals. Not microwave dinners or takeout. Actual recipes. I found a weird comfort in chopping vegetables and searing meat in a pan. It gave my hands something to do. Gave my evenings purpose. I reached out to an old college friend, David, who I hadn't spoken to in years. We met for coffee, and to my surprise, it wasn't awkward. We talked for hours. He introduced me to a small hiking group he was part of, and suddenly, my weekends had structure. Fresh air. Laughter. I started therapy, too. Quietly. No one knew. Just me and a woman named Evelyn who listened without judgment and helped me untangle years of buried resentment. "You've been auditioning for their approval your whole life," she said during one session. "What if I told you the role doesn't exist?" That line stuck with me, because she was right. I'd spent years trying to earn something they were never going to give me, trying to be enough for people who only saw my value when they were in crisis. So I stopped performing. I stopped justifying. And I started building something for myself. By fall, things felt different. Cleaner. Simpler. My savings had grown again. I'd picked up a few freelance cybersecurity clients and was finally considering the business idea I'd shelved years ago. A consultancy for small businesses who couldn't afford full-time IT teams but desperately needed security guidance. I started drafting a plan. Bought a domain. Sketched out services. Nothing flashy, just smart, slow growth. In November, I got a small handwritten envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a wedding invitation. Brandon and Cassie. February 17th. All-inclusive resort in Cancun. Printed on thick ivory cardstock with a gold embossed border. And at the bottom, no gifts, just your presence would mean the world. I stared at it for a long time. Then I flipped it over. Nothing. No note. No personal message. Just an invitation. As if we'd all been on good terms. As if nothing had happened. 2 days later, my mom called. Not to ask how I was. Not to apologize. But to ask if I was coming. "Brandon's really hoping you'll be there," she said. "He feels bad about how that conversation went. You know how he is. He's got a good heart. Just doesn't always think things through." I didn't say anything. "And, if you were coming, we were hoping you could help with one small thing," she added, almost as an afterthought. "What thing?" "Well, it's about the rehearsal dinner. The resort wants payment up front. Your dad's card got declined, and we're still waiting on a reimbursement from the caterer. We were just wondering if you'd be willing to cover it, and we'll pay you back once we get it sorted." There it was. The roll. The fallback. The ATM. I could feel it, like a jacket they were trying to slip back over my shoulders. But this time, it didn't fit. Something had shifted in me, and as I listened to her talk, I realized this wasn't just a moment. It was a test. And how I answered would define everything that came next. But I didn't give my answer then. I told her I'd think about it. And I did. For 3 full days. Because what I was about to do would take planning, patience, and just the right timing. Because they wanted me at the wedding. And oh, I'd be there. Just not in the way they expected. 3 days. That's how long I sat with it. My mom's request, the invitation, the audacity of it all. For 3 days, I didn't respond. I didn't call. I didn't even look at the RSVP card tucked in the back of the ivory envelope. I just thought about the years I'd spent quietly supporting them while Brandon coasted on charm and excuses. About the countless times I made space for them, for him, sacrificing weekends, money, and mental bandwidth just to keep things peaceful. About the way they'd toasted to his engagement with the same breath they used to beg me for help. And most of all, I thought about the moment in my kitchen when Brandon stood there, asking me for $5,000 like it was a tip for good service. There was a time, not long ago, when I might have caved. But that version of me was gone. And the version of me that remained? He didn't want peace. He wanted clarity. So I started planning. Not to destroy them. Not to hurt them. But to show them exactly what they'd built. Brick by brick. The first thing I did was dig. Not dirt on Brandon. That would have been too easy, and honestly, I didn't need it. His track record spoke for itself. Instead, I focused on the wedding. Cassie had posted a full Pinterest board with color palettes, floral arrangements, and dream venues. Public, of course. I scrolled through it like a detective analyzing a crime scene. Every detail was there. Pink peonies, gold accents, a beachfront ceremony under a wooden arch. It was real. Booked. Confirmed. A destination wedding in Cancun, February 17th. About 70 guests. Ceremony at 4:30 p.m. sharp. I clicked through the resort site, Sun and Sol Grand Riviera, and pulled up the group reservation link. Cassie had even posted the code. That was my opening. I booked a single night. Not for February 17th. For February 15th. 2 days before the wedding. Why? Because I wanted to observe. Watch the setup. See who came early. Gauge the mood. It gave me flexibility. And, more importantly, it gave me proximity. Next, I set a calendar alert for every major deadline. Flight confirmations, RSVPs, vendor due dates. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was tracking. Then I called David, the same friend I'd reconnected with after cutting ties with Brandon. David worked in digital marketing, but more importantly, he was the most ruthlessly organized person I knew. I explained the situation, left out some emotional details, but gave him the bones. I need help making a point, I said. Something that's not illegal, not cruel, but unforgettable. He laughed. You want a psychological slap without leaving a bruise. Exactly. David was in. We met that weekend over coffee and whiteboards. Brainstormed. Pitched angles. Vetoed anything that felt too dramatic or out of character. This wasn't about a scene. It was about an echo. Something they wouldn't shake off easily. What we landed on was simple. I'd go to the wedding. But not as a guest. And not as a ghost, either. I'd be visible. Just not in the way they expected. No suit. No gift. No RSVP. Just presence. But for it to work, I needed a symbol. Something quiet but piercing. Something that would sit in their minds longer than any outburst ever could. So I started working on a letter. Not a rant. Not a confrontation. A letter. Addressed to Brandon. Handwritten. Folded and sealed in an envelope. A mirror, basically. One that reflected every moment he'd overlooked. Every favor he'd forgotten. Every time he'd spoken about me like I was a vending machine with unlimited options. I wrote it and rewrote it. Burned the first draft. The second. By the fifth version, it stopped sounding angry. It sounded precise. I'll share the full thing later, but here's a line I remember vividly. You've always asked what you could get from me. Not once have you asked what it cost. In January, I got an email from my mom. Subject line, need your RSVP. The message was polite. Too polite. Like it had been copy-pasted from some bridal website. I didn't respond, but I knew she took silence as a maybe. A week later, she called. I let it go to voicemail. Hey sweetheart, just checking in. Haven't heard back about the wedding. Brandon and Cassie are finalizing numbers. We'd really love to see you there. Also, your father wanted to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner thing. Just a quick favor. No pressure, but call us when you can. Quick favor. No pressure. The greatest hits. I archived the voicemail and kept building my plan. David and I made a checklist. Researched the resort layout. Done. Found blueprints online from a wedding vendor's blog. Knew where the ceremony would be, where the dinner would be held, and most importantly, where the vendor entrance was. Book a one-night stay. Done. I used a different credit card, just in case. Scheduled delivery of the letter. This took the most thought. I wanted it to land in Brandon's hands on the morning of his wedding, when tensions would be high, when there'd be no time to talk or argue, just enough time to read it and feel it. David helped me coordinate with a local concierge service. I hired them to deliver a sealed envelope, labeled from Aaron, to the groom's suite at 10 a.m. on February 17th, just before haircuts and boutonnieres. The woman running the service didn't even ask what was inside. Apparently, grooms get a lot of surprise letters. I wasn't the only brother with something to say. In the meantime, I kept living my life. The consultancy? Gaining traction. I landed my second client in mid-January and was getting referrals. The gym? Still consistent. Therapy? Ongoing. But beneath it all, a slow anticipation was building. Not revenge. Not really. More like justice. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that just lands. A week before the wedding, Brandon texted me again. Yo, Need to know if you are coming. Cassie's freaking out about numbers. Also, can you front the deposit for the DJ? They need it by Friday. No punctuation. No please. No acknowledgement of the last time we spoke. I stared at the message. Then, without thinking, I typed one sentence. I'll be there. Sent. He replied in under a minute. Legend. Appreciate you, bro. I didn't say another word. Didn't ask about the DJ. Didn't confirm anything else. And I knew, deep down, that he thought that meant I'd cover it. He thought, I'll be there, meant the same thing it always had. I'll catch you. But not this time. This time, it meant, you'll see me. And that was going to be enough. Because the wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a stage. And for once, I didn't have to be the silent one in the wings. I just had to show up. And let the truth speak for itself. February 15th. I landed in Cancun late in the afternoon. The sky was coral-colored, the ocean visible from the airport shuttle. I kept to myself. Checked in with no fanfare. Wore sunglasses, hoodie, hat. Incognito, but not hiding. The resort was massive. Pools like lakes. Staff that greeted me like royalty. I walked the grounds slowly. Found the wedding setup already in progress. The arch was up. Flowers arriving. Staff rehearsing the dinner layout. I saw my parents walking near the pool. My dad in a polo shirt. My mom in oversized sunglasses. They didn't see me. I stayed back. Watched. Observed. They looked happy. Unbothered. At peace. And weirdly, I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. Like I was watching a show I used to be in. I turned, walked to my room, and set my alarm for the next morning. February 16th would be quiet. But February 17th? That was showtime. I'll tell you exactly what happened that day. But first, just know this. Brandon opened that letter. He read every word. And when he looked up from it, he didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He just stood there. Still. For once. And that stillness? That's when I knew the plan had worked. But trust me, that wasn't even the main event. Because what happened next? That was the twist no one saw coming. The morning of February 17th started warm and still. The sun filtered softly through gauzy resort curtains as I sat on the edge of the bed, flipping the envelope in my hand for the 100th time. It was simple, white, sealed neatly, with Brandon written in dark blue ink across the front. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was something quieter, steadier. Like this was just a page being turned in a story that had dragged on too long. At exactly 9:45 a.m., I slipped the envelope into the padded folder provided by the local concierge and handed it off to the hotel staff member we'd arranged. A local man named Luis. Polite, professional, and perfectly uninterested in whatever drama he might be delivering. It will be in his suite before 10, he assured me with a nod. I thanked him, slid him an extra tip, and returned to my room. There was nothing left to do but wait. The letter was all I needed. It wasn't angry. I'd made sure of that. It wasn't some revenge manifesto or a sob story begging for understanding. It was a mirror, a surgical reflection of every choice Brandon had made, every line he'd crossed, every dollar he'd casually borrowed like it came with no strings. I'll share an excerpt now, because this is what broke him. You've always seen me as a wallet, a backup plan, a silent brother in the background who says yes because it's easier than fighting. But every yes costs something. Time, sleep, dignity. Every yes built a version of you that never had to change. You stood on a beach and toasted your engagement with the money I gave you to save your home. And I said nothing. You asked me to fund your next venture while laughing about the last one. And I said nothing. But I'm not saying nothing anymore. You'll get married today. You'll smile for cameras and kiss under an arch built on money you never earned. And I'll be there, not to support you, but to witness what you've built. Because this isn't about revenge. This is about recognition. And you're going to remember, for the rest of your life, the moment your older brother stopped being the safety net. I waited. By 11 a.m., the resort buzzed with wedding prep. People rushed past my suite, dressed in pastel linen and panic. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, vendors barking instructions in 2 languages. Every detail was being obsessed over, except the one they couldn't control. Brandon. He wasn't smiling. I saw him from a distance once, around noon, pacing near the edge of the beach ceremony site, staring at the ocean like it might give him an answer. He wasn't talking to Cassie, wasn't laughing with the groomsmen, just pacing, staring. Luis had delivered the letter, confirmed it. Brandon had opened it right there in his suite. Alone. I knew that because I paid Luis a little extra to wait in the hallway and let me know the moment Brandon finished reading. He didn't say anything. Luis had told me with a shrug. Just sat there, quiet, then folded it and put it in his pocket. That was all I needed. I didn't attend the ceremony. I wasn't interested in watching him pretend everything was fine. Instead, I took a walk through the resort's outer gardens, bought myself a drink from a bar that faced the water, sat quietly in the shade as the ceremony unfolded 100 yards away. At 4:47 p.m., the music stopped. Cheers echoed across the lawn. Brandon and Cassie were married. But the fallout? That had only just begun. It started with the rehearsal dinner bill. Remember how my mom had asked if I could cover it up front? Well, she'd assumed, without asking, that I would. So they booked it. Flowers, lighting, an expensive 3-course meal for 50 people on a private deck by the sea. And I didn't pay, which meant the resort charged it to my parents' room. And when they tried to check out the next day, they were met with a surprise bill, $5,278.41. Their card? Declined. Their second card? Also declined. Panic ensued. I found out about this later, through Cassie's cousin, who I'd met briefly at the bar the night before. She thought I was hilarious and ended up oversharing after a few drinks. They were freaking out this morning. She laughed, barely able to contain it. Your mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. Your dad was arguing with the manager, trying to say the charge was a mistake. She took another sip. Then Brandon just left. Said he needed air. Didn't even help. I didn't say much. Just smiled. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's lonely. But the money wasn't even the real blow. That came later. After the wedding. After the photos and the fake Instagram captions and the congratulatory DMs. It came in April. Cassie left Brandon. Turns out, when you build a marriage on delusion and entitlement, it crumbles fast. According to David, who'd stayed in touch with Cassie's cousin, things had started falling apart within weeks. Brandon had floated the idea of borrowing the rest of the wedding money to invest in yet another business opportunity. Cassie said no. He got defensive. She dug deeper, found out about other debts he hadn't disclosed, loans from friends, credit card balances, a bounce check for the photographer, and then she found the letter. He'd kept it, folded neatly in the bottom drawer of their nightstand. She read it, twice, and that's when things snapped. I wasn't there for the breakup, obviously, but word travels. Cassie moved out, took the apartment furniture with her, filed for an annulment within 6 weeks. Brandon called me after that. Voicemail. His voice cracked, rambling, trying to sound casual, but barely holding it together. Hey, I know things have been weird, but I could really use someone to talk to. Everything's just falling apart, man. I get it if you're mad, but I dunno. Call me. I never did. And my parents? Well, they tried to do damage control. Called once in May, then again in June. Left long messages, full of regret and half apologies that never actually said sorry. Just versions of, we didn't know how bad it got. You've always been so independent. We thought you didn't need us. Brandon's had a hard life, you know. We just tried to support him. I listened to each one, then deleted them. Because forgiveness is a choice. But access? That's a privilege. And they'd lost it. Today, it's been 9 months since the wedding. I haven't spoken to Brandon since. My parents have finally stopped calling. My life. It's better than it's ever been. The consultancy is thriving. I signed my biggest client 2 months ago, ironically, a chain of bridal boutiques that needed cybersecurity audits. Full circle, I guess. David and I are launching a side project this fall, a budgeting app for freelancers. It's nerdy, but it's ours. I bought a new couch. A nice one. Paid for it in full. And every morning, I wake up with a sense of peace I never used to have. Because I no longer live in the shadow of their expectations. I no longer build my worth around what I can give them. I reclaim my life. Silently. Intentionally. And they still don't understand how they lost me. That's the beauty of it. They thought revenge would be fire and fury. They thought I'd yell, scream, storm out, or cut them off in some dramatic way. But no, I just stopped giving. And that was the loudest silence they'd ever heard. I'm Jake. I'm 29 years old now, but I moved out when I was 18. Well, more accurately, I was pushed out. I didn't leave because I wanted to be independent or because I had some dream to chase. I left because my parents made it clear there wasn't a place for me in the house anymore. They told me it was time to learn how the world works, that I needed to man up, and make it on my own. Those were their words, not mine. I didn't argue. I packed my bags and left with whatever I could fit in a beat-up sedan I bought with the money I made working part-time at a pizza place. No graduation party, no teary goodbye, no offers of support. Just a quiet closing of the door behind me. My brother, Ryan, 3 years younger, had a very different experience. He was the golden boy from the start. Athletic, charming, and always the center of attention. He could do no wrong. If I came home late from work, I was irresponsible. If Ryan missed curfew, it was because he lost track of time and needed rest. If I got a B+ on a math test, they asked what I did wrong. Ryan brought home a C, and they laughed it off, saying, "Not everyone is a numbers guy." You get the idea. He wasn't just the favorite. He was the only one they really invested in. New clothes, a car for his 18th birthday, tutoring, sports camps. Meanwhile, I bought my first laptop with 3 months of saved tips. For a long time, I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it was just how things were. I thought maybe it was just easier for them to relate to Ryan. Maybe I didn't fit their mold, and that was on me. I focused on building something for myself. I worked long hours, took night classes, skipped meals to save on food, and started a small business with a buddy when I was 22. Things got better. Slowly. It wasn't easy, but I made it work. By 26, I had 3 full-time employees. By 28, I was doing well enough to invest in real estate. None of this was shared with my family. Not out of spite, but because they never really asked. We kept in touch in the most superficial ways. A birthday text, a forwarded meme, an occasional group chat message. I'd see pictures of Ryan with my parents at fancy dinners or on vacations, places they never took me, even once. I stayed cordial, but distant. Not bitter, just done trying. The turning point came a few months ago when I got a call from my grandmother. She's one of the few people in the family who's ever shown me warmth without conditions. She told me Ryan was getting married. Big event. Venue booked. 5-course meal. Custom floral arrangements. Something out of a magazine. I didn't say much at first, just that I was happy for him. But I noticed something odd. "Grandma," I asked, "when's the wedding?" There was a pause on the line. A beat too long. Then she said, "Oh, I assumed they told you. It's on June 10th. Invitations went out last week." I hadn't received one. "Maybe yours got lost in the mail," she said quickly, her voice a little higher than usual. "You know how the post office is these days." I could hear the strain in her voice, the way she was trying to make excuses for something she didn't agree with. I knew right then it wasn't lost. I wasn't on the list. Not even a courtesy invite. I didn't say anything more about it. I thanked her for letting me know, wished her a good evening, and hung up. The next day, she called me again, this time with more edge in her voice. "Jake, I talked to your mother," she said, "and I told her that if you're not invited, I'm not going. Your grandfather agrees. We're not going to stand around pretending this family is whole when they keep cutting you out." That meant a lot coming from her. She wasn't someone who stirred the pot, but she wasn't afraid to speak up when something truly bothered her. Sure enough, 3 days later, I got a last-minute invitation in the mail. One of those generic ones with the pre-printed names and a mass-produced gold foil border. No note, no call, just a single card, shoved in a cheap white envelope, as if they were checking off a box. I almost didn't go, but something about it gnawed at me. Not the lack of invitation, not even the fact that I was clearly a second thought. It was the deeper truth behind it, that after all these years, after building my life from the ground up without their help, I was still the outsider. Still the one they wanted to keep in the shadows. Still the one they wanted to hide from their perfect picture. And yet, now that Grandma made a fuss, they were willing to slap a Band-Aid on it and pretend I was part of the celebration. Like inviting me last minute would make me forget everything they'd done. Then I got another call, this time from a cousin who was helping with the setup. She was on speakerphone with another cousin, talking casually when she said something that made my stomach drop. "Can you believe Ryan and Melissa are getting the house? Like, the actual house. The one they grew up in. The one I grew up in." "Yeah," the other voice chimed in. "Your aunt said they're handing over the deed as a wedding gift. Isn't that wild? I mean, they could have sold it for, like, $500,000 easy, but I guess it's keeping it in the family." I didn't say a word. I let them finish the conversation and hung up. I just sat there, staring at the wall, piecing everything together. They didn't just kick me out at 18. They gave the house to my brother. As a gift. At his wedding. The same house I wasn't welcome in after high school. The same one I had to sneak back into months later when I forgot a childhood photo album and got yelled at for trespassing. That house had been erased from my life, and now it was being wrapped in a bow for the golden child. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anger, but out of a quiet, burning clarity. There are moments in your life when the fog lifts, when the years of pretending things are okay suddenly peel away and all the patterns become visible at once. That was one of those moments for me. All the childhood slights, all the excuses, all the small humiliations that seemed forgettable at the time, they came rushing back, but this time with context. This wasn't a fluke. It wasn't just how things were. It was a pattern, a choice, over and over again. So I made a choice too. I decided I would go to the wedding. Not for them, not even for Grandma, but because I had something to bring with me, something they weren't expecting. And when I finally walked into that 5-star venue in my tailored navy suit, a few heads turned. My cousin gave me a small smile. Grandma looked relieved. My mother spotted me across the room and forced a smile so tight it made her cheekbones twitch. She walked up to me, tilted her head, and said in the softest, fakest tone I've ever heard, "Jake, I'm glad you could make it. Just try not to embarrass us today, all right?" I smiled back, because she had no idea what I brought with me. When my mother pulled me aside at the wedding and whispered, "Try not to embarrass us today," I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so painfully predictable. That single sentence captured everything I'd come to expect from her. Carefully veiled control, artificial politeness, and a complete inability to recognize her own hypocrisy. I just smiled back, not saying a word, but inside, something cracked, clean, cold, and permanent. I wasn't angry in the loud, confrontational way. I was angry in the quiet, surgical way that comes from years of wounds finally refusing to close. The venue was straight out of a luxury wedding blog. White marble floors, gold-accented chandeliers, a string quartet playing something elegant and forgettable in the background. Guests walked around with champagne flutes, snapping photos in front of a floral arch that probably cost more than my first car. Everyone was dressed to the nines. Everyone, except me, looked comfortable. I kept my movements slow and deliberate, watching everyone from a distance. Ryan stood across the room in his custom tux, laughing with his groomsmen, drink in hand. His bride, Melissa, was posing for pre-ceremony photos with her side of the family, all smiles and perfect posture. She was beautiful, can't deny that. The kind of elegant that magazines gush over. But she had that same polished, practiced expression as my mother. Performative kindness with a layer of cold steel underneath. I found Grandma and Grandpa at a corner table. They both looked relieved to see me, but there was a heaviness in their smiles. "I'm glad you came," Grandma said softly as she hugged me. "They can pretend all they want, but you belong here just as much as anyone else." Grandpa just squeezed my shoulder. He doesn't say much these days, but his silence usually carries more weight than most people's words. The ceremony started shortly after. White chairs, perfect aisle, petals scattered by a flower girl who looked like she'd been coached within an inch of her life. The officiant spoke with the kind of poetic emptiness weddings thrive on, about love, family, unity. I kept my face still, but my mind wandered. Family. They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't say is that water doesn't pretend. Water doesn't smile in your face while replacing you. After the vows were exchanged, the real party began. Cocktail hour flowed into dinner, which flowed into speeches. I sat at a table near the back with a few cousins I barely knew anymore. We made awkward small talk, but I mostly kept quiet. I was watching. The first speech came from my father. He stood confidently, glass in hand, and said, "To my son, the one who made me proud every step of the way." I blinked. It was a simple sentence, but it hit like a brick to the chest. Every step of the way, as if I didn't exist. As if he hadn't raised 2 sons. As if Ryan was the only one worth remembering. There was polite laughter, warm applause. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. Melissa's father spoke next. Then the maid of honor. Then Ryan. They each told stories of triumph, loyalty, support. The kind of anecdotes you pull from a scrapbook of golden memories. Meanwhile, my entire existence had been edited out of the narrative like a deleted scene that didn't test well with the audience. And then came the moment that broke something deep inside me. The announcement. It was subtle at first. A casual mention slipped into the end of Ryan's speech, almost like an afterthought. I can't thank my parents enough for everything they've done, including, well, this still feels unreal, giving us the house I grew up in. Applause. Smiles. Some gasps of admiration. A few guests turned toward my parents, who were glowing like royalty. I didn't clap. I didn't blink. Because while everyone else heard a sweet gesture of family generosity, I heard the sound of a door being slammed in my face. Again, let me be clear, I never expected the house. I never wanted it. It wasn't about the property. It was about what it symbolized. I had been discarded from that home like a broken toy, and now it was being handed over to the one they'd always saved everything for. I got up from my table and walked outside. The evening air was cooler than I expected, and I took a few deep breaths, pacing near the garden path behind the venue. I didn't cry. I haven't cried in a long time. But there was a tightness in my chest that felt unfamiliar, like grief mixed with something sharper. I leaned against a marble column and tried to collect myself. That's when I heard footsteps. It was my mother. She walked up behind me, her heels clicking against the stone walkway. "Jake," she said, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "Are you okay? You seemed off during the speeches." I turned to face her slowly. "You didn't tell me about the house," I said, voice flat. She blinked. "Well, we weren't sure if it would be the right time to." "No," I cut in. "You just didn't want me to know. Until it was too late to matter." She sighed, exasperated. "This isn't about you, Jake. Don't make it about you. This is Ryan's day." I stared at her, stunned. Not because of what she said, but because she believed it. She really thought I was the one making things difficult. She really believed I was being selfish for reacting to being erased. "I'm not trying to ruin his day," I said slowly. "But you gave him the house. The same one you kicked me out of. Do you really not see how that might feel cruel?" Her smile returned, thin and sharp. "We didn't kick you out. You were a man. It was time for you to stand on your own." I was 18. Exactly. Old enough. I shook my head. "So what's the difference with Ryan? Why didn't he have to stand on his own?" She tilted her head, like she was speaking to someone dense. "Because he's different. He's always needed a little more support. And he gave us something to be proud of." There it was. The knife, twisted without flinching. I stepped back from her touch. I think she noticed my expression shift, because her tone suddenly turned icy. "Jake, I understand this is hard for you. But you've made your choices. You left. You built your own life. You should be happy for your brother." I stared at her for a long moment, then asked something I hadn't even realized I needed to ask until that moment. "Why didn't you ever come visit me?" She blinked. "What? All those years? All those birthdays? Not once. Not one visit. Not one dinner. What?" She looked uncomfortable now. She glanced around like someone might overhear. "We were busy. Life got complicated." I let the silence hang. She hated silence. "You just didn't want to see me succeed without you," I said quietly. "You didn't want the reminder that I did what you said I couldn't." Her face hardened. "That's enough." "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice still calm. "You know what's enough? Me pretending that any of this ever mattered to you. I came here to be civil. But let's not lie to each other anymore. You never wanted me here. You wanted a photo op. You wanted to keep Grandma quiet." She tried to interrupt, but I raised a hand. "I'm done pretending I'm the problem. I've worked too hard. I've built too much. I didn't need your house. I didn't need your help. But I deserved better than this." She folded her arms, defensive. "You don't get to come here and lecture me on what you think you deserved." "No," I said. "But I do get to remind you that you raised 2 sons. One of them you handed everything to. The other you threw out. And he's the one you underestimated." She scoffed, turned on her heel, and walked back inside without another word. I stayed out there for a while, the wind tugging at my jacket. Something had changed inside me. I couldn't go back in and smile through the rest of the reception. Not after that. But I wasn't done yet either. Because I hadn't brought just myself to the wedding. I had brought something else. A folder. A single manila folder tucked carefully inside my jacket pocket. Inside that folder was something my parents hadn't anticipated. Something I'd worked on for the past 6 months in silence, ever since I started buying up property in our hometown. Something that had the power to unravel the perfect little lie they'd built. I reached into my jacket and ran my fingers across the edge of it, just to remind myself it was real. They wanted a perfect wedding. They were about to get something else entirely. And I hadn't even made my move yet. I didn't go back inside the reception hall after that conversation with my mother. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I finally understood something I'd spent years trying to ignore. I didn't belong in that world. Not their version of it. I stood outside beneath the twinkle lights lining the back garden, listening to the muffled laughter and clinking glasses echoing through the walls. The house I grew up in had been gift-wrapped and handed off like a party favor, and I was expected to smile about it, to clap politely, to pose for pictures, to pretend. But the thing about pretending is, eventually it breaks you. I walked to my car alone. No goodbyes. No hugs. Not even a text afterward. Just silence. The kind of silence that used to crush me years ago. The kind that made me question if I was the problem. But this time, it was different. This time, the silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful, because I was done waiting for their approval, and I was finally ready to focus on what I was building. Still, for a few weeks after the wedding, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left the shell to keep walking around. I went through the motions, showed up at the office, signed contracts, answered emails. But I was distracted, numb. It wasn't the house that hurt. It was the finality of it all. The realization that they weren't going to change. That there wasn't some secret version of my parents waiting to show up one day and say they were proud of me. That fantasy was gone. I spent a few late nights in my office just sitting in the dark, thinking about that kid who packed his life into 2 duffel bags at 18 and drove off with no roadmap, just the need to prove something. That version of me hadn't expected luxury. He just wanted to matter. I wish I could say there was a big dramatic turning point, some lightning bolt of clarity, but there wasn't. Just small, quiet choices that slowly reshaped my world. Like the morning I showed up early to our main property, the one I'd renovated from a crumbling duplex into 6 high-end studio apartments. One of the tenants, an older guy named Lou, was out front struggling with a busted grocery bag, cans rolling across the sidewalk. I picked them up without thinking. He thanked me, then said, "You the owner?" "Yeah," I said, brushing off my jeans. He looked surprised. "Huh, you're younger than I figured." We chatted for a bit. Nothing deep. But before he went upstairs, he turned and said, "Place is nice. People here feel safe. That means something, kid." It stuck with me. That night, I pulled out an old notebook I hadn't opened in years. It was stained and battered, filled with messy handwriting and long-abandoned goals. I flipped through pages of early business ideas, budget breakdowns, scribbled mantras. One line near the back caught my eye, circled 3 times in red. "Build the life they said you couldn't." I sat with that for a while. They hadn't just doubted me. They'd erased me. So I started rewriting the story. First, I called Alex, my college roommate turned business partner. He and I had co-founded our real estate company in our mid-20s, just a couple of guys with drive, stubbornness, and barely enough cash to buy our first foreclosure. Since then, we'd expanded slowly, carefully, but I'd always held back a bit. Played it safe. Stayed under the radar. Not anymore. "Let's go big," I told him. "Define big," he said, laughing. "I want 5 more properties by the end of the year. I'll handle the capital. You find the listings." He didn't ask questions. Just said, "I'm in." I took every lesson I'd learned the hard way. Every rejection, every mistake, every humiliating stumble, and used it like fuel. I stayed late, ran numbers, met with contractors at dawn. I made calls during lunch breaks, worked weekends, skipped parties. I wasn't running from something anymore. I was running toward something, toward a version of myself that didn't need their permission to succeed. And slowly, things started shifting. We landed a warehouse-to-loft conversion on the edge of downtown. Then a neglected motel I turned into affordable micro-units. Then a small strip mall that we leased to local businesses, coffee shops, barbers, a daycare. I hired staff, set up a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs trying to start their own businesses. I even started donating anonymously to organizations that helped kids aging out of the foster system find housing and jobs, because I knew what it felt like to have nowhere to go. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Ryan and Melissa, not obsessively, but enough. They moved into the house about a month after the wedding. Had it repainted, got a new kitchen installed. Melissa started a blog about modernizing heritage spaces. It was all very curated, very on-brand. I didn't follow her Instagram, but I saw the posts because mutual acquaintances kept sending them to me. Each one felt like a little jab. Family brunches on the porch, captioned, "Love our forever home." A throwback photo of Ryan and I as kids, cropped so I was barely visible in the corner. It was surreal, watching someone else turn your childhood into their aesthetic. One night, about 6 months after the wedding, I drove past the house. Not on purpose. It was just on the way back from a property inspection. I slowed down without meaning to. The porch lights were on. Melissa's SUV was in the driveway. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the same steps I used to sit on as a kid, watching the stars because the inside didn't feel safe. The same sidewalk where I once scraped my knees learning to ride a bike. The same lawn I had to mow every week, even in July, even when it gave me nosebleeds from the heat. I wasn't bitter. I was just aware. Aware of how far I'd come, and how little they'd noticed. That awareness crystallized one morning when I got a call from my father. The first direct communication I'd had with him since the wedding. No hello. No small talk. Just, your grandmother's birthday dinner is Saturday. Don't make it awkward. I paused. Awkward how? You know what I mean, he said. It's a family gathering. Let's not make it about you. I almost laughed. You mean, don't make it about the fact that you gave away the house you kicked me out of and haven't acknowledged me in 6 months? There was silence on the line. Don't be dramatic, Jake, he said finally. We're all trying to move forward. No apology. No ownership. Just the same expectation. Fall in line. Be quiet. Show up. Smile. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. I did go to that dinner, but not for him. I went for Grandma, because she still called every few weeks to check in. Still sent birthday cards in her handwriting. Still remembered my favorite pie. I showed up with flowers and a bottle of her favorite wine. And I walked into the same house I'd once considered a prison. It had changed. The layout was the same, but the walls were repainted. The furniture was different. The smell was unfamiliar. And yet, as I stood in that foyer, all the old memories came flooding back like ghosts. Memories of dinners where I wasn't allowed to speak unless spoken to, of silent car rides with my father after report cards, of birthdays with store-brand cake, while Ryan got rented inflatables and photographers. The dinner was fine. Polite. Stiff. Ryan greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Melissa barely acknowledged me. My parents acted like nothing had happened. They offered me a seat like I was a distant relative who'd RSVP'd late. Halfway through the meal, my father raised a toast. To family, he said, lifting his glass. To what matters most. I didn't raise mine, because I'd already found what mattered most. And it wasn't sitting around that table. What none of them knew, not Ryan, not Melissa, not even my parents, was that in the 6 months since the wedding, I had done something I never thought I'd do. I bought the land behind their backyard. A half-acre parcel that used to belong to an elderly neighbor who moved to Florida. It had gone on the market quietly, and I scooped it up through a shell company. No one questioned it. No one noticed. But they would. Eventually. Because what I had planned wasn't just business. It was personal. And as I watched my mother refill Ryan's wine glass, laughing at a joke he'd stolen from a sitcom, I realized something with perfect clarity. They had spent their lives building a fantasy where I didn't exist. It was time to remind them that I did. And I wasn't finished yet. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. I think it's best served prepared. And that's exactly what I spent the next several months doing. The night of Grandma's birthday dinner, I sat alone in my condo overlooking the city skyline, watching the lights flicker like fireflies in the distance. It was late, past midnight, but my mind was wide awake, running through everything like a chessboard. The lies, the erasure, the house, the speech, my mother's words echoing in my head. Try not to embarrass us today. I smiled to myself. She had no idea, because while they'd been busy playing pretend in their picture-perfect little world, I'd been building mine, brick by brick. And now, with everything in place, it was time to start setting the pieces. Slowly, carefully, quietly. Because the key to a clean revenge isn't force, it's timing. You don't slam the door. You let them walk through it, smiling, unaware there's no floor on the other side. Let me back up. The property behind the house, my old house, had always been a weird sliver of land. Technically part of a larger lot that was subdivided decades ago. It had been left untouched since the 90s. A shed, some trees, a bit of fence. I used to toss a football back there with Ryan before he decided I wasn't cool enough to be his brother anymore. The old owner, Mr. Dyer, passed away just after the wedding. His daughter, who lived in Tampa, didn't want the hassle. A quiet real estate agent listed the land without much fanfare. I saw it the morning it hit the private MLS and sent an offer before lunch. Cash. No contingencies. It was mine by the end of the week. From the back porch of the house Ryan now called his forever home, you could look out and see it, if you knew what you were looking for. But most people wouldn't notice. And that was the point. Over the next few weeks, I incorporated a new development LLC. Clean name. Generic. Then I reached out to a local architectural firm and said I wanted to build something small, modern, and eye-catching. A design that pushed the boundaries of zoning, right up to the limits of what was legally permissible, both in size and in style. I told them, make it bold, make it loud. I want this to stand out. And when they asked about the neighboring property, I just smiled and said, I'm not worried about the neighbors. The plan? A 3-story modernist duplex, sleek black steel, glass balconies, rooftop terraces. 0 lot line setback on the side that faced Ryan and Melissa's heritage home. Massive windows. Floodlights. A rooftop garden that would stare directly into their master bedroom. Oh, and since the zoning was mixed use, I threw in a proposal for a coffee and wine bar on the bottom floor. Just to stir things up. I knew my parents wouldn't say anything publicly. That would mean admitting they gave the house to someone who didn't even own the full view. But Ryan would snap. He always did when things didn't go his way. He had a temper, not explosive, but entitled. The kind that boiled just under the surface and leaked out as sarcasm or passive aggression. He couldn't stand not being in control of the narrative, which was why I didn't stop there. I started attending city council meetings. Quietly, listening, asking questions about noise ordinances, parking permits, commercial foot traffic allowances. I didn't need the permits yet. I just wanted them to see my face, to remember my name. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old contact, Evelyn, who ran one of the local wedding venues just outside town. She and I had met years ago when I rented a small event space for a real estate seminar. She liked me, said I reminded her of her nephew, but with better manners and better hair. Evelyn's venue, while beautiful, had been struggling since COVID. Cancellations, refunds, limited bookings. So when I called her and said, what if we hosted exclusive pre-wedding pop-ups at my new property, styled shoots, vendor showcases, micro-weddings under 40 people, and split the revenue? She was intrigued. I didn't even need the building finished yet. I just needed the idea to gain traction. Within a month, we had mock-ups, interest lists, and vendors lined up. Local florists, caterers, even a string quartet that worked part-time doing high-end brunches. I called the concept the Atrium. Evelyn loved it. And more importantly, so did Instagram. I created an entire digital brand for the Atrium. Logo, color palette, minimalist, dreamy aesthetics, a fake waitlist, a press release about the future of luxury micro-venues in suburban spaces. I paid a lifestyle blogger to post a teaser shot from the build site with a caption, finally, a modern venue that doesn't feel like a barn or a country club. You'd be amazed how fast a whisper turns into an echo. By the end of the 4th month, the city was buzzing, and Ryan still had no clue. Until the day Melissa saw the surveyors in the backyard. I got a text from my cousin Eric later that night. Bro, Ryan's losing it. He said there's construction happening behind the house. New build? He thinks it's a shopping plaza or some nightmare LOL. I didn't reply. I just let it simmer. 2 days later, I got the first call. It was from Ryan. I hadn't heard his voice directly since the wedding. He didn't even say hello. Hey, are you involved with that property behind the house? Straight to the point. I admired that, at least. I kept my tone neutral. I might be. You might be. Well, I own it. So yeah, I suppose I am. Silence. Then, what are you building? Mixed use. Duplex. Commercial space. It's all public record, Ryan. You're putting a business back there? Yup. Wine bar. Coffee in the morning. Event space at night. Great lighting. Really modern. You'll love it. You've got to be kidding me. Nope. You can't do that. I laughed. Pretty sure I can. But hey, feel free to file a formal complaint. Maybe mom and dad can write a letter of concern on your behalf. He was fuming. I could hear it in the tightness of his voice. This is our home. Correction, I said calmly. It's my old home. You're just the latest tenant. He hung up. I stared at the screen for a while after that, then opened the manila folder I kept in my desk drawer. Inside was the original deed, the one my parents had removed my name from when I turned 18, without even telling me. I found out years later while reviewing public records for a different property. Just one more cut I'd swallowed quietly. But I hadn't forgotten. The next step was the neighborhood association. Or rather, the lack of one. See, when the neighborhood was first built in the 70s, there was an HOA. But it was dissolved during a messy legal battle in 2009, and the paperwork was never fully reinstated. Which meant no architectural restrictions, no design codes, and no local board to vote on what I could or couldn't build. Most people assumed it still existed. But assumptions are the playground of the unprepared. Melissa reached out next. She sent a message through Instagram, as if we were just two business owners chatting over kombucha. Hey Jake, hope you're doing well. Just wondering if you'd be open to a quick chat about the new project? We're concerned about privacy and would love to collaborate on a solution. Let me know. I didn't reply, because she hadn't reached out when I got uninvited from the wedding. She hadn't reached out when my mother erased me from the guest list. She hadn't reached out when they gave away the only home I ever knew. But now that her view was threatened, now it was time to collaborate. I printed the message and tacked it to my bulletin board. A few days later, the real escalation began. My father called. This time he tried to be diplomatic. Jake, he said, we need to talk. Man to man. I almost choked on my coffee. He invited me to lunch. Neutral location. The kind of steakhouse where the lights are always too dim and the water comes in glass bottles. I showed up in a charcoal blazer and open collar. He was already seated. No handshake. No smile. You're making a scene, he said as soon as I sat down. Nice to see you too, Dad. You're not seriously putting a business behind the house. Not just a business. A brand. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. He leaned in. Do you have any idea what this looks like? I do. He blinked. It looks like a man who built something from the ground up and decided not to let people who cut him out pretend he's invisible anymore. His jaw clenched. We're asking you, respectfully, to reconsider. Like you asked me to leave at 18? Or like you asked the notary to take my name off the deed? That shut him up. I didn't come here for a fight, he said finally. You came here to protect your narrative. Silence. Then he made a mistake. He reached across the table, hand on mine, and said, Jake, this could have been yours, if you just stayed in line. I stared at him, then pulled my hand back. That's the problem, I said quietly. You think I wanted to be in your line. I was never in your line. I was building my own. The waiter arrived to take our order. I stood up instead. No need. We're done here. He didn't stop me. Back at my office, I called Evelyn. Let's move up the schedule, I said. We're going to break ground next month. She didn't ask why. She just said, let's make it loud. And we would. But not just with concrete and steel. No, I had one last card to play. Because in that same folder, behind the deed, behind the city permits, behind the architectural plans, was something else. Something my parents had forgotten about. A letter. Handwritten. Dated 10 years ago. From Grandma. It started with, Jake, if you're reading this, it means your parents failed you again. And ended with a gift I hadn't used yet. A key. Not to a house, but to a truth that would shake everything they thought they'd hidden. Revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's a signature. And sometimes it's a key. Let me take you back. That letter from Grandma, the one I found tucked in the back of the manila folder, it wasn't something I opened right away. She'd given it to me on the day I left home at 18, slipping it into my backpack without a word. Don't open this unless you really need it, she'd said. At the time, I assumed it was a note of encouragement, or maybe just some family recipe. I left it sealed, moving it from drawer to drawer over the years, thinking one day I might read it when I had the emotional bandwidth. I finally opened it the night I walked out of that steakhouse. The envelope was thin, faded around the edges. Inside was a single handwritten page and a small brass key. The letter began like this. Jake, if you're reading this, then something's happened, maybe something painful. I want you to know I always saw you. I always loved you for who you are, not who your parents expected you to be. You were never the problem. They were. This key opens a safety deposit box. I've been adding to it since the day you were born. My heart stopped. She went on to explain that when I was a baby, she'd set aside a small savings account in my name, something separate from what she contributed to Ryan's college fund and the family estate. Quietly, privately, she'd intended to give it to me when I turned 21, but when she saw how my parents treated me after I left, she changed her mind and held on to it. Kept it hidden. She worried they'd manipulate me into handing it over, or worse, use it against me. The key was to a deposit box at a small regional bank 3 towns over. The instructions were simple: go alone. Keep your mouth shut. Use it only when you were ready. I stared at that key for a long time. The next morning, I drove out early. The bank manager took one look at the letter and nodded with surprising familiarity. Mrs. Turner was a very loyal client, she said, guiding me down a hallway lined with security doors. She told me you might come someday. The deposit box wasn't huge, but what was inside stopped me cold. Cash, a stack of government bonds, several documents, a second key, this one labeled Unit 7A, Cornerstone Storage, and finally, a manila envelope labeled Deed, Parcel 17. It took me a minute to understand. My grandmother hadn't just saved money. She had purchased land I didn't even know she owned. Parcel 17. I drove straight to City Hall and pulled the records. And there it was, a sliver of land on the other side of Ryan and Melissa's house. Just 20 feet wide, but running the entire length of their fence line. A legally separate lot, zoned individually. In essence, the other side of their property. So now I own both. Front yard, backyard, left side, right side. The house my parents gifted them wasn't boxed in. It was boxed out. They had no idea. And that's when the real fun began. Step 1. Fencing. I filed for permits to erect decorative privacy fencing. First on the back lot I already owned, then on the newly discovered Parcel 17. Black slatted aluminum, 12 feet high, completely opaque. Within weeks, crews were installing panels along both ends of the house, blocking off natural light and creating a canyon effect around their backyard. Their forever home suddenly felt like a storage unit. Melissa posted a passive-aggressive Instagram story captioned, "Some people have no respect for aesthetics." I didn't respond. I just adjusted the final fence panel so it perfectly reflected sunlight into their master bedroom window every morning between 6:45 and 7:15. Step 2. The atrium. Construction began shortly after the fencing went up. Bright trucks, loud machines, contractors shouting over radios. Every day from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days a week. The noise ordinance allowed it, and I made sure we followed every rule to the letter. My lawyer even sent the city inspector a holiday basket. Melissa called Evelyn to complain. Evelyn told her she didn't take orders from influencer brides with boundary issues. When they tried filing noise complaints, the city sent back notices stating the builder, my company, had full commercial rights and was well within construction hours. Step 3. The mailbox. This one was petty, but satisfying. Using the other parcel, I registered a new address that ended in the same number sequence as theirs, 1 digit off. Same street, nearly identical address. I then sent myself packages, documents, and marketing materials in large branded envelopes with confidential stamps and real estate letterheads. Naturally, a few pieces accidentally ended up in their mailbox. One evening, I drove past and saw Ryan pacing on the sidewalk, holding a crumpled envelope, his jaw clenched. He looked directly at one of the workers and shouted something. The worker just smiled and handed him a business card. Step 4. The reveal. 6 months into construction, just before the venue was set to open, I hosted a private developer's preview. Catered. Soft jazz. Press. Invitations sent to select community leaders, local influencers, and yes, Grandma. None to my parents. None to Ryan. None to Melissa. But I knew they'd come anyway. Curiosity always overpowered pride. Sure enough, as guests arrived, I saw my father lurking by the hedges, trying to pretend he was just passing through. Melissa walked by twice with sunglasses on, fake casually snapping photos with her phone. Ryan didn't show, probably too proud. Or too furious. Grandma looked radiant. She pulled me aside after the ribbon cutting, holding my arm with a proud but trembling grip. "I didn't think you'd use the key," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd need to," I said. She nodded. "They always thought you were the quiet one, the soft one, but you were just patient." "Patience is power," I said. "They taught me that." Without meaning to. The atrium opened to glowing reviews. We hosted 2 weddings in the first month, 3 in the second. Bookings filled up for the entire year. A luxury wedding blog listed it as one of the top 10 chicest hidden venues in the Midwest. Melissa's own wedding venue got bumped off the list. Poetic. But I wasn't done. Because Ryan and Melissa? They still own the house. But now, surrounded by floodlights, foot traffic, and the constant hum of wine bar chatter, it wasn't the tranquil retreat they'd envisioned. They tried to sell, but buyers weren't biting. Too noisy, they said. Too close to a commercial property. Property values had dipped. Not dramatically, just enough to sting. The house that was once an untouchable legacy now sat stale on the market for 6 months. Finally, they lowered the price. Twice. Then a third time. And then, I made them an offer. Below asking. All cash. Through another shell company. Melissa refused, calling it insulting. But Ryan? Ryan knew. He knew what I was doing. He knew I was the shadow creeping along the edges of everything they built. He tried to hold the line. But holding the line costs money. And eventually, they needed out. 6 weeks later, the offer was accepted. The house, my house, was mine again. They didn't know until the final paperwork closed. Until a new deed was filed. Until a for sale sign came down and a no trespassing sign went up. I never planned to live there. But I didn't tear it down either. I turned it into a community center for kids aging out of the foster system, complete with free financial literacy classes, resume workshops, and transitional housing. I called it the Turner House. The day the banner went up, my mother drove by. She didn't come inside. She just sat in her car across the street, staring at the sign. I saw her through the window. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. She didn't smile. Neither did I. A week later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. No greeting. Just, I didn't realize what I'd lost until I saw your name on the deed. I hope you find peace. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in the same folder that once held the key. Then I locked it away. Because this story, this chapter, it's finished. And as for the house, the legacy, the silence they tried to bury me with, I built something louder, something permanent. And this time, they couldn't erase me. They had to live with the echo. I was 17 when it happened. My name's Zach, and by then I had already learned the golden rule in our family. Keep your head down and don't rock the boat. Especially when it came to my mom. She was the queen of our suburban kingdom. Polished smiles at church, passive-aggressive texts in the family group chat, and a way of rewriting history so smoothly you almost believed it. Almost. My dad, quiet and worn down, mostly stayed out of it. My younger sister Maddie was her golden child. Dance recitals, honor roll, homecoming court, the works. Me? I fixed up my grandpa's old pickup truck and got a part-time job bagging groceries. That was apparently all the proof my mom needed that I was going nowhere fast. My grandpa, though, he always saw me differently. I used to help him with odd jobs around his property on the weekends, fixing fences, patching up the barn roof, even just raking leaves while he told me stories about how men used to do things. He was one of those guys who didn't say much unless it mattered, but he always made sure I left with a 50 in my pocket and a jug of sweet tea to take home. He never came out and said he was proud of me, but he didn't have to. He just was. Every year on my birthday, he'd handwrite me a card. Not one of those glittery ones from the drugstore. I mean real paper, folded in half, shaky handwriting, always with some kind of life advice. Don't borrow what you can't pay back. Listen more than you speak. Stand up when someone shakes your hand. And every time, there'd be a check inside. Nothing insane, usually 50 or $100. Just enough to fill my gas tank and buy myself a greasy burger without feeling guilty. I always thanked him. I never expected more. That year, my 17th, my birthday landed on a Sunday. My mom insisted on a family brunch at our house. I use that term loosely because what she really meant was that she and Maddie would pose for Instagram while I played host, reheating frozen waffles and making sure there was enough orange juice. Grandpa was the last to arrive. I heard his old Buick crunching up the driveway and practically ran outside, if only to get a break from Maddie's shrieking over a smudged eyebrow pencil. Grandpa looked tired. His gray cardigan hung looser than usual, and his face was more sunken, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. We hugged, quick and firm, and he handed me an envelope with my name written in his usual blocky print. I tucked it in my pocket and promised to read it later. He patted my shoulder and nodded, like he always did. Brunch was the usual performance. Mom flitted around refilling coffee cups and complimenting Maddie's natural glow, ignoring the fact that she was wearing more makeup than a YouTube beauty guru. Dad said maybe 5 words the whole time. When I finally opened the card at the table, I read the message, smiled at the familiar bit of grandpa wisdom, Work hard, even when no one's watching, and then unfolded the check. It was for $100. I blinked, surprised. That was more than usual, but not wildly out of character. I smiled at him across the table. Thanks, Grandpa, I said, lifting the check. This'll help a lot. You didn't have to. He frowned, confused. What check? I held it up. The birthday one. $100. That's really generous. The room went silent for a moment. Maddie paused mid-selfie. My dad shifted in his chair, but my mom's fork clinked loudly as she set it down and stood up. I'll get more syrup, she muttered, disappearing into the kitchen. Grandpa leaned forward, squinting. Zach, I didn't write you a check this year. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe he forgot. It's okay. I really appreciate it. No, he said slowly. I wired you money. To your savings account. A week ago. $100,000. You ever feel the air get sucked out of a room? That's what happened. Everything froze except for my brain, which went into overdrive trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. 100,000? That couldn't be right. He had to be joking. But Grandpa wasn't a joking kind of guy. I looked over at my mom, who was now standing in the doorway, pale and still, gripping the syrup bottle like a grenade. What are you talking about? I asked, voice cracking slightly. My savings account. I called the bank, he said, ignoring my mom's laser glare. Your dad gave me the routing info years ago. Said you were saving up for school, maybe a truck. Figured you'd need a real boost soon. So I wired it. Last Monday, I felt sick. I hadn't seen a single notification. No deposit. No alert. My bank app showed the same sad 3-digit balance it always did. I stared at Grandpa, then turned to my mom. She blinked, tight-lipped. That's not. I mean, we should talk about this later. What later? I said, louder than I intended. You knew about this? Zach, she said sharply, like I was a child again. Not at the table. No, Grandpa said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. I want to know what happened to the money. I stood up, my legs trembling, and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app again, double-checking every tab, every account, even the one I hadn't touched since I was 13. Nothing. No deposit. No trace. My mouth went dry. Mom, I asked, more quietly this time. Did you move it? She hesitated. Just for a second. But it was long enough. Then she softened her face into that carefully curated expression she always used when trying to seem reasonable. Zach, honey, you're still a minor. We're just holding on to it for you. It's complicated. You took it. My voice cracked again, but this time with disbelief. You actually took my money? I didn't take it, she snapped. I managed it. There's a difference. What does that even mean? It means, she said, crossing her arms, that I made a judgment call. One that protects your future. Your grandfather doesn't always think through these things. And I wasn't going to let that kind of money go straight to a teenage boy with no plan. Are you serious right now? I stared at her, stunned. That was mine. It's our family's, she said flatly. And I'm not going to sit here and be attacked for making a responsible decision. Grandpa pushed back his chair, slowly. He looked even more tired now, not just physically, but soul deep. Like something in him had cracked. I gave that to Zach, he said. Not you. Not your husband. Him. She didn't respond. She just stood there, arms crossed, mouth pressed into a line, refusing to look at either of us. Grandpa shook his head and turned to me. I'll get it sorted, he said quietly. I promise you that. But I already knew. I could see it in her face. She'd moved it, used it, maybe even spent it. And I had no clue where to begin finding it again. That was the moment the illusion cracked. The perfect family, the careful brunches, the polite smiles. I realized then how deep her control ran. How many lies had been dressed up as concern. And I knew, right then and there, this wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't say anything else. I just sat back down, heart pounding, stomach churning, staring at the check for $100 that she had probably written in Grandpa's name without him knowing. A distraction. A cover. That night, while everyone was pretending nothing had happened, I lay in bed with my laptop open, logging into every bank, every email, every financial account I could remember ever having. And what I found in the following days, well, that's when everything really started unraveling. I didn't sleep much that night. My brain kept circling around one thing. If Grandpa wired $100,000 and it never showed up, where the hell did it go? I kept going over it, trying to convince myself maybe it was just a mix-up, a delay. Maybe he typed in the wrong account number or the bank held it for verification. That made sense, right? I mean, I was 17. Maybe that triggered something. But no matter how many times I refreshed my app, no miracle deposit appeared. My balance was still $348.19. Most of it from last week's grocery shift and a few leftover birthday bills from relatives. The next morning, I waited for my mom to bring it up. She didn't. She hummed while folding towels and went on about Maddie's upcoming dance showcase like nothing had happened. I stood at the edge of the laundry room and just watched her. Calm, smiling, so composed, like she hadn't just casually stolen 100 grand from her own son. Can we talk? I finally asked. She didn't look up. We already talked yesterday. No, we didn't. You talked. I found out something huge and you just deflected. She folded a towel in half, then again, setting it neatly on the pile. Zachary, this isn't some dramatic betrayal. Don't twist it into something it's not. I swallowed hard. Did you spend it? That got her attention. Her eyes flicked up, just briefly. Excuse me. The money Grandpa sent. Did you spend it? There was a pause. Then she scoffed. Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like this is some criminal investigation. You're still a child. Your father and I made a responsible financial decision to safeguard a ridiculous amount of money that shouldn't have been thrown at you like a game show prize. So you did take it. She sighed and finally stopped folding. It's not in your account, no? And yes, we moved it into a secure family investment. It's doing more good than it would sitting in a teenager's savings account collecting pennies and interest. What investment? I asked, already dreading the answer. That's not your concern. It is if it's my money. Her voice sharpened. That money was gifted. And in this house, we manage gifts like that together. Your grandfather should have consulted us. Why would he need to consult you? I shot back. It was for me. He wired it to me. She set the last towel down, hands trembling just slightly. You're blowing this way out of proportion. No one stole from you. You live here rent-free. We feed you, clothe you, drive you to work when your truck won't start. That money is part of the family's future. And there it was. The family's future. Her favorite phrase. Translation, Maddie. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. But something in me shifted. That morning was the start of a slow burn. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just stopped trusting her. Stopped assuming she had anyone's best interests at heart but her own. A few days later, I got curious enough to poke around. Not snooping exactly. But after dinner, I noticed her purse sitting on the sideboard while she helped Maddie stretch for ballet class. I glanced around and, heart pounding, opened it just long enough to see the front of her checkbook. The most recent carbon copy said, down payment, $87,000. My hands went cold. I snapped a picture of it and walked away like nothing happened. 2 weeks later, I found out what it was for. I came home from school to a big, sold sign staked in the front yard next door. Our neighbors had moved out months ago, and the house had been on the market forever. I didn't think anything of it until my mom greeted me with her usual bright smile. Guess what, she said. We're buying it. I blinked. What? She laughed. Next door? Isn't that amazing? We're going to turn it into a rental property. Or maybe an Airbnb. We haven't decided. But the market's picking back up, and it was such a good deal, we couldn't pass it up. I stared at her. You used my money to buy a house. Don't be dramatic, she said. It's an investment. And someday, when you're older and understand how finances work, you'll see how brilliant this is. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You bought a house without telling me. With money that was meant for me. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Zach. You're 17. What were you going to do with it? Buy video games? Waste it on a truck with rims? That house will triple in value by the time you're 30. That's not the point. Then what is? I clenched my fists. You didn't even ask. You didn't tell me. You just decided it was yours. She went quiet for a moment, her smile faltering. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. You live under this roof. You don't pay a dime in bills. Your grades are average. You're not getting scholarship offers. Maddie, on the other hand, is working her tail off every day in honors classes and dance and student council. She's earned our support. I blinked. What does Maddie have to do with any of this? She's going places. She has potential. And she'll need help soon. College applications, private coaching, maybe even a car. We need to think about what's best for everyone. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked away. Again, because deep down, I knew if I stayed in that room, I'd say something that'd fracture everything. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called Grandpa. He picked up on the second ring. Zach. Yeah, I said, voice tight. Can we talk? We met at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with cracked leather booths and a jukebox that never works. I told him everything. I showed him the bank screenshots, the checkbook photo, even the listing for the house next door. He didn't say much, just listened. At one point, he closed his eyes and took a long breath through his nose, like he was trying not to explode. I should have known, he muttered. I should have wired it straight to you. You tried, I said quietly. She got there first. He rubbed his jaw. That money was from the land sale. I've been holding it for years. For you. I didn't want you to start adulthood broke like I did. Thought maybe it could pay for college, or tools, or seed money if you wanted to start something. I just wanted to give you a head start. I swallowed hard. You didn't do anything wrong. No, he said. But your mother did. He paused, then looked me square in the eye. You want it back? I nodded once. Yeah, I do. He tapped the side of his mug. Then we're going to have to be careful. Smart. She's slippery when she wants to be. I could have cried, but I didn't. I just nodded again, harder this time. It was late when I got home. My mom was sitting in the living room with her laptop and a glass of wine, scrolling through real estate photos like nothing had happened. Maddie was watching TikToks in the kitchen, earbuds in, humming along to something that sounded like a chipmunk with auto-tune. I went straight to my room, locked the door, opened my laptop. That was when I started planning. I dug into county property records, pulling up the purchase details for the house next door. And there it was, listed under an LLC. The same one my dad used for his side projects that never seemed to turn a profit. It was a shell, a name. No actual company. No website. No employees. Just something my mom registered years ago for tax write-offs. But it was in my dad's name, not hers. That was interesting. I started keeping a notebook, tracking dates, statements, little things she said. I paid attention in a way I never had before. How she moved money, how she justified things, how easily she bent reality to fit her story. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting this go. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they told me the real reason they bought the house. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was out working on my truck when Maddie bounced over with a phone in her hand and a huge grin. Guess what, she said. I looked up from the oil pan. What? They're giving me the house. I blinked. What? She laughed. Not now, duh? But eventually. After it's fixed up. Mom said it'll be my place when I go to college nearby, so I can focus on school without dorm distractions. Isn't that amazing? I stared at her. My heart was pounding. You're getting the house? Yeah, she said, like it was obvious. They said it just made sense. I mean, you're probably gonna move out soon anyway, right? But I'll be here. And it's such a cute house. I already picked my room. She skipped off before I could respond, twirling her phone in the air. I stood there, oil dripping from my hands, heart thudding in my ears. They didn't just take the money. They gave it away. To her. That was the moment. The moment it all snapped into focus. This wasn't just unfair. It was war. And I was done playing nice. I didn't say anything that night. Not when Maddie bragged over dinner about how they might knock down the back wall to expand her room. Not when Mom poured herself another glass of wine and mentioned that everyone makes sacrifices for family. Not even when Dad, who hadn't looked me in the eye since the brunch, mumbled something about how opportunities come when you least expect them. I just chewed my food and stared at the plate. I don't remember what we ate. I just remember tasting nothing. That night in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My chest felt hollow and tight at the same time, like I'd been robbed of more than just money. I kept replaying everything. The brunch, the checkbook, the house, the smirk on Maddie's face. The $100,000 I'd never even seen. Not a penny. Gone. Just vanished into drywall and future hardwood floors. And worst of all, no one apologized. No one explained. No one even acknowledged it like it mattered. It was just understood. This was how things worked in our house. You obeyed. You didn't question. And if you were the less promising kid, you learned to settle for crumbs. I hit my lowest point 2 weeks later. It was Maddie's sweet 16. My birthday had been 2 months ago, just brunch and a few gift cards. No party. No decorations. My mom said it was a weird time of year, and everyone was too busy. But for Maddie, they rented out the event room at a lakeside restaurant. Lights, catering, a live DJ. She had a glittery silver dress and a professional photographer trailing her like she was some kind of influencer. I didn't want to go, but I had to. Mom said I needed to support the family. I wore my best button down and tried to stay out of the way. The party was crowded. Kids from Maddie's school, teachers, some of Mom's friends, even our old neighbors. Everyone was dancing, taking selfies, hugging Maddie like she was the second coming of royalty. I sat in the corner near the dessert table, watching it all unfold like I was invisible. Then came the slideshow. I didn't even know they'd made one. The lights dimmed. Maddie squealed. The screen lit up with baby photos, clips from her ballet recitals, school awards. That time, she met someone semi-famous at a dance convention. Every photo was perfect, curated, golden hour filters, and soft music. Then came the voiceovers, Dad saying how proud he was, Mom choking up, talking about how Maddie was the dream they always had. Even Grandpa had a clip, though I'm pretty sure they filmed it without telling him what it was for. He just said something like, "She works hard. I hope she stays humble." I wasn't in a single photo. Not one. There were family shots, Christmases, birthdays, vacations, but I'd been cropped out or skipped entirely. I saw my own elbow once. Maybe. And the worst part? No one else noticed. When the lights came back on, everyone applauded like they'd just witnessed a cinematic masterpiece. Maddie hugged Mom, wiping fake tears from her eyes. I got up and walked outside. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I leaned against the railing and felt my knuckles clench. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was like I didn't exist. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and said something out loud I never had before. I'm getting out. I didn't know how or when, but I meant it. I wasn't going to be a footnote in my own life. The next morning, I started the climb. Step 1 was getting back control over myself. I'd been coasting, half-assing school, wasting time online, clocking in and out of my grocery job like it was a prison sentence. I was still smart, but I'd stopped trying years ago. What was the point? In my house, no matter what I did, Maddie outshined it. But now I had a reason. I started staying late at the library, reading everything I could about money, investing, business, personal finance, even real estate law. I watched hours of free lectures online, took notes, made spreadsheets. I downloaded budgeting apps and began tracking every cent I spent. No more fast food. No more impulse junk. Every dollar was a soldier. I was going to build something. At work, I asked to pick up extra shifts. Then I asked the store manager if I could learn more, unloading trucks, managing inventory, helping train new hires. I wanted responsibility. At first he was surprised, but then he started trusting me. Within a month, I was basically assistant managing the backroom. A few weeks after that, I got a raise. Not much, but enough to notice. At school, I asked one of my teachers if I could make up missed assignments. He said no one had ever asked him that in October before, but he agreed. I worked through every late paper, every half-finished lab, every missed quiz. I didn't tell anyone why, but my GPA started crawling up. Quietly. At home, I said as little as possible. Mom noticed the change eventually. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was meal prepping a week's worth of turkey sandwiches. "You've been busy lately," she said, voice light. I nodded. "Studying? Working?" "Yeah." She tilted her head. "What's the sudden motivation?" I shrugged. "Just figured it was time." She smiled like she didn't believe me. "Good. Keep it up. It'll look good on scholarship applications. Maybe we can even." I cut her off. "Don't worry about it." She blinked. "About what?" "Scholarships. I've got it handled." Her lips pressed into a line. She didn't like that. I could tell. She liked control, liked being the savior. Me being self-sufficient didn't fit her script. But she didn't push it. Not then. 2 weeks later, Grandpa called me. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said. About not seeing a dime." I braced myself. "I want to make it right," he continued. "I talked to a lawyer. I'm changing the terms of my will." My heart skipped. "What?" "I'm not going to live forever," he said bluntly. "And I'm done trusting your mom with anything related to money. You're getting the farm." I froze. "Grandpa, no arguments. I've already started the paperwork. It'll be held in trust until you're 18. But it's yours. That place was built by our family, and I'll be damned if it becomes some Instagram photo op for Maddie's engagement party." I didn't know what to say. I'd grown up on that land. The barn, the creek, the little shed where Grandpa kept rusted tools and stories from the war. It was the only place that ever felt like mine. And now it was. "Thank you." I whispered. He grunted. Don't thank me yet. We're gonna clean it up, fix the roof, maybe plant a proper garden. You'll need help. I'll be there this weekend. Good. From that moment on, every free minute I had went into rebuilding that farm. I cleaned gutters, hauled junk, painted walls. Grandpa showed me how to install insulation and check for termite damage. We patched up the barn roof together while listening to old jazz cassettes. And while we worked, he taught me more than I'd ever learned in school. Not just about carpentry or tools, but about people. How to read contracts. How to see through polite lies. How to trust your gut. That place became my sanctuary. But I didn't tell anyone at home. I didn't tell them that the land was being transferred to me. I didn't tell them that I'd started an online business reselling refurbished tools I picked up at auctions. I didn't tell them about the part-time internship I landed with a local contractor who liked my hustle. I didn't tell them anything, because they weren't entitled to it. They never once asked me how I was doing. They didn't notice that I was gone more often, that my bank account was slowly growing, that I was getting stronger, more confident, more grounded. They didn't see the change, because they weren't looking. Maddie was too busy shopping for new furniture for her future house. Mom was too busy showing off that they owned 2 properties now to her book club. Dad was still drifting in and out of conversations like always, a ghost in khakis. And me? I was building something. Slowly, quietly, but with purpose. And deep down, I was waiting for the right moment. The moment when I'd stop being invisible. The moment I'd pull the rug out from under all of them. Because the truth was, I wasn't just rebuilding myself. I was laying the foundation for something bigger. Something they wouldn't see coming. It started with a spreadsheet. Simple, clean, titled in all caps, Reclamation Plan. I opened a blank Google sheet one night, after everyone had gone to bed. The house was dark, quiet, except for the faint hum of my laptop and the ticking of that annoying wall clock my mom insisted tied the dining room together. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I thought about what I was really trying to do. This wasn't about money anymore. Not just money. It was about power, because that's what they'd taken from me. My autonomy, my voice, my place in the family. They'd buried me under fake smiles and golden child Instagram captions, under brunch photos and property deeds, and he's just not focused whispers. But they forgot one thing. I was watching, listening, learning, and I was going to take it all back. That spreadsheet became the blueprint. Tab 1, Timeline. I listed every major event since my birthday. The date Grandpa said he wired the money. The brunch. The check. The day I saw the checkbook. When Maddie said she was getting the house. Every little moment where something shifted. I wanted a record, not just to keep things straight, but because it reminded me this wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. Tab 2, Evidence. Screenshots, photos, transcripts. I documented everything. I had pictures of the carbon copy from Mom's checkbook, bank statements from Grandpa's wire transfer, emails, texts, even a voice memo I secretly recorded when Maddie bragged about her future house again. I uploaded it all to a secure drive under a fake email account, separate from my usual accounts. Passwords changed. 2-factor authentication turned on. I was leaving nothing to chance. Tab 3, Leverage. This was the fun one. It started empty, but grew quickly. My first major discovery came by accident. I was helping Grandpa clean out one of the old filing cabinets in the barn when I found it. A dusty blue binder labeled LLC Records. Inside were pages of old paperwork, including the original registration forms for the LLC my parents used to buy the house next door. It was dated 6 years ago, but something stood out. My dad wasn't listed as the sole owner. My mom was the majority stakeholder, which meant her claiming it was under Dad's name during that conversation. A lie, a deliberate one. I scanned the whole binder and uploaded the contents. Then I dug into the county tax assessor's portal and found that the property was listed under the LLC, but the mailing address on record wasn't even ours. It was my mom's old office building. Another lie, another layer. They thought I wouldn't look. They really thought I'd just accept it. That same week, I visited a friend of Grandpa's, a retired estate attorney named Mr. Harlan. He still kept an office above the hardware store, mostly to avoid boredom. Grandpa trusted him. That was enough for me. I told him the situation. Not every detail, just enough to raise the question. If someone wires money to a minor's savings account, and the legal guardian quietly moves it without informing the recipient, what are the options? Mr. Harlan leaned back in his squeaky chair and steepled his fingers. Well, technically, that's not just unethical. It's probably illegal, especially if it wasn't disclosed or documented. I nodded. What if the funds were used to purchase property under an LLC? He arched an eyebrow. Whose name is the LLC under? My mom and dad. And the wire was intended solely for you. From my grandfather. He told me. He has proof. Harlan exhaled slowly. You may have a case, especially when you turn 18. I paused. What if I don't want to go nuclear? He smiled faintly. Then you start by applying pressure. Quietly. Letting them know you know. People like that, they're not afraid of consequences. They're afraid of being seen. I left that meeting with a folder of advice and a strange sense of calm. I wasn't alone anymore. Over the next few months, I kept working, saving, studying. Grandpa and I built out the back shed into a small office, just a desk, a Wi-Fi booster, and a refurbished laptop I'd upgraded myself. It became my war room. I started a small business refurbishing tools and farm equipment, listing them online with the help of a friend from school who was good at digital marketing. We split profits 70/30ths. By Christmas, I'd saved almost $10,000. I also started offering labor at discounted rates to neighbors and local businesses. Not glamorous, hauling lumber, cleaning gutters, fixing minor electrical issues. But every job taught me something. Every task gave me more independence. My parents didn't notice. Or if they did, they chalked it up to me finally growing up. Meanwhile, I fed them just enough to stay under the radar. Work's been busy. I'm saving up for a better laptop. Just thinking about community college, nothing crazy. They nodded, mildly impressed, but never asked too many questions. Why would they? In their eyes, I was still playing catch-up. Still the background character in Maddie's highlight reel. But the tide was shifting. It really started to turn when Grandpa got sick. It was subtle at first, missed appointments, forgetting small things. Then one day, he got lost driving home from the post office. The doctor said it might be early onset cognitive decline. Maybe Parkinson's. Maybe something worse. We didn't know yet. But we knew one thing for sure. He needed to get his affairs in order. That's when he called another family meeting. It happened at the farm, in the living room, just like the old days. Mom, Dad, Maddie, and me. Grandpa stood in front of the fireplace, hands shaking just slightly, holding a thick manila envelope. I wanted you all here, he began, because I'm making some changes. Mom tilted her head. Changes to what? To everything, he said. My will, my trusts, my power of attorney. Mom's smile faltered. Dad, we can help with all of that. There's no need to rush into legal decisions. I've already filed them, he said. These are just copies. She froze. Filed them with who? County, my lawyer, and Zach. He handed me the envelope. Inside was everything. The farm, the remaining assets, his medical directives, his revised will, and a notarized statement clarifying that the $100,000 wired to me had been a personal gift, not a loan, not a family investment. You could have heard a pin drop. Then Mom said the quiet part out loud. This is ridiculous. Grandpa didn't even flinch. No, what's ridiculous is stealing from your own son and pretending it was for his own good. Dad looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. Maddie looked confused. Mom, though? She looked cornered. This is revenge, she hissed. You're punishing me for trying to protect this family. No, Grandpa said. I'm correcting a mistake. One I let go too long. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Not yet. After they left, after the yelling and the slammed door, Grandpa turned to me. They're going to come after this, he said, nodding toward the envelope. Find ways to twist it. But don't let them. You're smarter than they think. I nodded, gripping the papers like a shield. The next morning, I got an email from my mom. Just one line. We need to talk. You're making a serious mistake. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Mr. Harlan and asked him to double-check the documents. He said they were airtight. A week later, I filed to open my own LLC, under my name only. I transferred my tool refurb business to it and applied for a small business credit line using my savings as collateral. Approved. I ordered business cards. Zachary M. Thomas. Owner, Red Barn Restoration Company. Tools. Labor. Legacy. I left one on the kitchen counter one morning before heading out to the farm. That was the first time my dad actually looked at me like I was someone new. I didn't smile. I didn't brag. Because I wasn't done yet. The house next door, the one they stole my money to buy, it was almost ready. Renovations done. Maddie had already begun decorating it on Pinterest. My parents were floating the idea of moving her in during college. What they didn't know was that I'd been reading every clause in their LLC documents. I knew something they didn't. The final card was almost ready to play. And when I did, it wouldn't just be revenge. It would be a reckoning. The final move started with a knock on the front door. It was a Tuesday morning. Spring was settling in, the trees starting to bud, and the air smelled like wet soil and quiet tension. I knew my parents would be home. My mom worked part-time by then, some flexible remote gig with a local interior design firm, and my dad was still between roles, which meant wandering the house like a lost tourist. I timed everything perfectly. Mom answered the door with her usual fake warmth, expecting a neighbor or maybe a package delivery. Instead, she was greeted by a well-dressed woman in a blazer, carrying a clipboard and wearing a badge clipped to her lapel. "Good morning," she said. "Are you Mrs. Thomas?" "Yes," my mother answered slowly. "My name is Claire Jensen. I'm with the county tax assessor's office. We've flagged a discrepancy in the ownership documents for the property located at 1139 West Holloway Lane, currently registered under an LLC managed by yourself and Mr. Thomas." I watched from my truck across the street. Windows cracked, heart thudding. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. That was the spark. Here's how it all came together. While Grandpa's lawyer, Mr. Harlan, helped secure my legal standing over the farm and get everything in writing regarding the original $100,000 gift, I kept digging. Through public records, through the bylaws of their LLC, through real estate law, and I found something they'd overlooked. When my parents used my money to fund the purchase of the house next door, without any written consent, without documentation, without even disclosing the source of funds in the LLC's initial filing, they triggered a clause in the county's conflict of interest policy regarding trust-held contributions from minors. See, in layman's terms, any substantial sum contributed to an LLC from a trust or minor's account must be documented, and the minor must have representation. I wasn't represented, and I had proof. Wire records, trust confirmation from Grandpa. And the best part? Because the money came from outside their own joint funds, from my grandfather to me, and was repurposed into their LLC without disclosure, it created a breach of fiduciary duty, especially since they were the ones legally responsible for safeguarding my assets as guardians. In other words, they stole. And now, the county was investigating. After the visit from the assessor, everything unraveled fast. First came the calls, voicemails, messages. My mom left me 5 in 1 hour, ranging from fake concern to veiled threats. "Zachary, this is your mother. We need to clear up this misunderstanding before it becomes a bigger issue. This is ridiculous. You don't understand how business works. Call me back. We raised you. We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us." I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I showed up 2 days later with Mr. Harlan at my side and a folder full of papers. We didn't meet at the house. That would have given them home field advantage. We met at the county mediator's office. Neutral ground. They looked tired, panicked. My mom had lost that practiced poise she always wore like a mask. Dad sat slumped, eyes darting between me and the documents. Maddie wasn't there. She still didn't know what was coming. "I assume you're aware why we're here," Harlan began, his voice calm. My mom opened her mouth, but Harlan held up a hand. "This won't take long." He laid out everything. The initial gift, the illegal transfer, the misuse of funds, the real estate filing error, the tax implications. My parents tried to deny it at first, claimed family money is shared and Zach didn't need it. But the law doesn't care about favoritism. The law only cares about paper trails. And I had the receipts. Harlan offered a deal. They could avoid formal charges and a full audit by signing over the house immediately. All of it. Title transfer. LLC dissolution. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue damages or back taxes. They stared at me like I was a stranger. "This is extortion," my mom hissed. "No," I said quietly. "This is accountability." It took an hour, but they signed. I walked out of that building as the sole owner of 1139 West Holloway Lane. It was mine now, and I wasn't done. 2 days later, I met with a realtor and listed it for sale. Maddie came home from school that afternoon to find the sign in the yard. She burst into the house in tears, screaming, "Why is there a for sale sign on my house?" My parents tried to explain, tried to spin it. But I didn't let them. That weekend, I held a family meeting at the farm. My turf. They came, reluctantly. Maddie wouldn't speak to me. My mom looked like she hadn't slept. My dad just kept staring at the floor. I stood in front of the porch, papers in hand. This isn't just about the money, I said. It never was. It's about what you thought you could get away with. The way you made decisions without me. The way you looked at me like I was disposable. No one responded. I turned to Maddie. I don't blame you, I said. You didn't steal the money, but you benefited from it. And when I tried to speak up, you acted like I was jealous. Her eyes were red. You humiliated me. No, I said. You were building your future on stolen bricks. I just took them back. Then I turned to my mom. You always told me I was the one who needed to grow up, that I didn't understand how things worked. But it turns out, I understood better than you thought. I watched. I learned. And I built something, without you. From scratch. I laid the final paper on the porch railing. I've spoken with Grandpa's medical team. I've filed the documents. I am now his legal medical power of attorney and financial custodian. Her jaw dropped. You can't do that. I just did. She lunged forward, furious. You think you're better than us now? Because of some farm and a flipped house? No, I said. I know I am. Because I didn't need to lie or steal to get here. She backed off. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't curse. Didn't gloat. Because this wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about peace. They left in silence. No dramatic outbursts. Just the sound of tires on gravel and a slammed car door. 3 months later, the house sold. I put most of the money into a separate trust. One that Grandpa helped me set up. A chunk went into the farm, where we built out a greenhouse and started a local produce business. Red Barn Restoration Company became Red Barn Living, tools, labor, and fresh-grown vegetables. Small but proud. Grandpa's condition stabilized for a while. We spent long afternoons watching storms roll in, sipping lemonade, and listening to old blues records. Sometimes, we didn't even talk. We didn't need to. Maddie and I haven't spoken since. My dad eventually emailed me, a long, rambling message about regrets and family and how things got away from us. I read it. I didn't reply. My mom sent a birthday card 6 months later. Inside was a $100 check. I mailed it back. No note. Just the check. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I had my name on a deed, a business license in my pocket, and a grandfather who looked at me with real pride. And for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I was home. They took my future without asking, so I built a new one without them.